If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to Mindshock True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire, and you are listening to the Columbine Conspiracy Podcast Series. This is episode 2, The Multiple Shooter Theory. And this theory has been around for quite a long time, and I am going to start off with the coincidence theorists and how they go about dismissing this theory outright without actual honest, logical, objective, scientific investigation, without falling for any kind of logical fallacies, which is, of course, what Mindshock is known for. This was one of the most requested podcast series. We went over a lot in episode 1, so if you haven't checked out episode 1, make sure you check that out. We are going to be building off of that. And there is some truly mind-shocking information that is not only available now, but was available within just a few years of the Columbine shooting. And a lot of it's been swept under the rug. A lot of it is simply ignored, like multiple giant elephants in the room. Just simply hallucinated to not exist, to soothe the dissonance of the coincidence theorists, the authority-worshipping cultists, those that don't have the mental capacity to objectively and honestly and logically look at information before jumping to assumptions and conclusions simply to go along with the official story. And how often in history is the official story true? A lot of questions and a surprisingly few answers, but more than zero. There are certain answers. There are plenty. A lot of the coincidence theorists say, well, if there was multiple shooters, why aren't people still talking about it? Well, some of the Columbine survivors still are. They might not be getting mainstream coverage on the Idiot Box and various news and documentaries that seem to come out every anniversary. But some of them are writing books. Some of them are still speaking out in their own way. They're just not getting mainstream coverage because, for whatever reason, damaging to the establishment, a certain narrative has been spun, and people are just willing to have so much blind faith that this narrative is true. And we will be unraveling this narrative with, of course, logic and reason at the forefront. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, if you find it interesting, if you want to help support logic and reason in a world where it is quickly becoming extinct, you can donate to our PayPal, help support the Mindshock podcast. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for notifications. Make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. Like and share this podcast, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. Just check the link in the description. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. All right, so we are going to start off with the de facto coincidence theorist subreddit, which is simply the Columbine subreddit. It is a controlled subreddit, like so many are, with sham moderators who shut down any logical, objective analysis and inquiry. Anything that doesn't go along with the status quo, they shut down under the guise of being impolite or whatnot. This is a common thread in many subreddits. You see this in the Maura Murray case, even the Jean-Benet Ramsey case. It's becoming more prevalent as more and more podcasts are coming out that are questioning more things instead of just taking on blind faith whatever the main narratives on the Idiot Box are. And that's threatening to the establishment. The authority-worshipping cultists just want to shut down any kind of scientific skepticism. They want everybody to go along, or they have neat little boxes and you're allowed to question, but only within the boxes, and then that's what makes it look like there's actual free debate. So anything outside of these boxes that triggers these Dunning-Kruger goofs and coincidence theorists is simply shut down. And we will examine exactly how that is done from the beginning here. So this is a thread on the sham subreddit r/Columbine. Conspiracy theories. Hi everyone, are there any conspiracy theories about Columbine, and what are they? This particular one was posted 7 months ago. Most of them are filtered, but again, they do want to keep up the illusion that there's free and open debate. So right off the bat, the sham moderator Delta Delta Dawn has Sticky to comment right at the top, clearly establishing motive here. Just a reminder, keep it civil, everyone. This post was allowed to discuss the conspiracy theories and demonstrate how they have been debunked. Which is a common thread among coincidence theorists. They hallucinate and pretend that all debunkings are legitimate, and there is no debunking of the debunking. And of course, clueless about all logical fallacies. This was not to have an open season on discussing actual case relevant theories that you may disagree with or that cannot be debunked. If people start acting aggressive, insulting, hostile, etc., the comments will be locked and post removed. We're all adults here, so let's act like it and be cordial in our communications. So clearly, again, this is what all sham subreddit moderators do. Anything that they don't like, they pretend it was too subjectively aggressive, or there was their subjective perception of insulting. And most of the time, they know that it actually wasn't aggressive, insulting, or hostile. They just know it was damaging to their narrative. So that's why they had to shut it down, and they just pretended it was for all these other reasons. Because again, and they're openly admitting civility is much more important than the truth, than justice, than any of these things. Being polite, for whatever reason, these goofs hallucinate that being polite supersedes and trumps everything else. Really weird, but again, that's why lies have speed, but the truth has endurance. And that's why all these years later, there are certain individuals who want the truth and who will not stop and who will not pretend and hallucinate that these survivors that clearly spotted shooters other than Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris don't exist, because they do exist. Now maybe they're mistaken, but to pretend they're not actually giving testimony that they're giving, that is a staple of these Dunning-Kruger coincidence theorists. And there are a few solid posters in this subreddit as well. The users are not 100% shams, just the moderators. But the majority of users here are not truth seekers either. They're, again, coincidence theorists, the Dunning-Kruger crowd, either intentionally steering away from the truth and shutting down lines of logical inquiry, or they're simply authority-worshipping cultists who do not understand basic logic, reason, critical thinking. So some posts here. A giant chunk of news footage recorded was either not archived or purposely never released, because journalists wanted to cover up the fact that they broadcasted footage of police recklessly firing into the school, showing uncensored bodies on national television, showing the infamous "one am bleeding to death" sign, but ignoring it, resulting in the death of Dave Sanders, and most controversially, interviewing students right after they escaped the school and immediately asking sensitive questions. Everyone was critical of the police and media for handling the situation very, very, very poorly, and they wanted to push forward that narrative that the police actually saved the day when they really didn't. So covering up any existing footage that shows their mistakes would spare them of any more criticism. This also goes hand in hand with the theory that law enforcement injured students. And again, I'm not sure how that has been debunked. The sham moderators pretend it all has, but... Another comment here: everyone should be critical of the police. The police aim to be heroes, but more often than not, when something like this happens, they wait outside like cowards they are until the shooting stops. And authority-worshipping cultists responded here: you just wait until you need the police. Not hating, just pointing out the obvious. The other individual's response was this: they will probably show up after I am dead or the crime has already occurred. I had my car broken into. I called the cops. An officer came, took some notes, and I never heard from the department again. And of course, there's that old adage, when seconds matter, police are only minutes away. Not to say, of course, that there aren't a lot of good cops out there, possibly the majority of cops, but I don't know if one can claim it's the vast majority. Another post here. There's a theory that Eric and Dylan's outside circle tried to join them after they heard a shooting was taking place. The rumor is based on the fact that the police found a couple of high school kids with trench coats near the school hiding in the bushes with BB rifles. Also, that the perpetrator of the subway murders that happened a year after Columbine is somehow connected to the shooter. And a post by user since deleted attempting to debunk this theory, and we'll look at how silly he is. This isn't true, but I think you've conflated several reports. I've summarized the accounts I think you're referring to with page numbers from the Columbine report. Jacob Apodaca and Chris Wisher were in Weaver Park near Columbine High School when they allegedly saw a shooter duck down in the bushes with a shotgun in hand, and this is from, these are pages 654 and 1262. Larry Petty, a 27-year-old man, was arrested after running toward the school with a knife and an empty .22 cal bolt-action rifle. He claimed it was an air-pump .22 cal BB pellet gun, but the arresting officer opened the bolt to check for ammunition, so he would have been able to tell. Perry also claimed that a student had called him at 11:30 a.m. to stop the gunman, although he later admitted that he hadn't known anyone at the school since the early 90s. Pages 9773 and 7658. Now, the problem with a lot of these so-called debunkings, not just in this case, but in any case, if there was a conspiracy and the police were in on it and intimidated people, who's to say they didn't intimidate this guy to change his story? I mean, part of known conspiracies, people are intimidated, they change their story. Yet somehow the coincidence theorists and the Dunning-Kruger crowd regarding the Columbine conspiracy, they hallucinate that that's evidence of it not happening. Let's trust the witnesses out of one side of their mouth, out of the witnesses who changed their stories, let's trust the story that matches the official narrative, while on the other side of their mouth saying witnesses aren't reliable with all the witnesses who don't match the official story. I mean, it's quite comical, the illogicality of coincidence theorists. John Ungerland said he saw Robert Perry driving a red Geo Metro near the school at about 2:30 p.m. According to him, someone fitting Joe Stayer's description was hanging out the window with a pistol, and they were both wearing trench coats. His girlfriend, Jenny Matthews, also got a small glimpse of them, and although she could not identify either one, she gave similar descriptions of their appearances, hair color, ages, dress. However, she said the object one of them was holding was 2 feet long, and she thought it was a camera. Camera or not, it's still plenty suspicious. 1702-503. And it's also curious how the coincidence theorists dismiss all these reports, even though some of them occur at times when the shooters, where Klebold and Harris were supposedly in the building. So clearly something's not matching up. A response here by Get Trailed. WTF. Columbine is like a dream. There's so much random expletive appearing every now and then, and it just doesn't sound real. And that's a good point, but all of this can be verified from the reports, which we will be diving into. Regarding the Splatterpunks, another post here. The Splatterpunks were 3 mysterious teens who showed up to the school dressed very similar to Eric and Dylan. They were associates of Eric, but didn't go to Columbine. They claimed that they had been driving around and heard a report about the shooting on the radio, which prompted them to drive to Columbine. According to Sheriff Stone, there had not yet been any information about the shooting broadcast by the radio at the time they claimed to have heard it. Out of suspicion, they were arrested. One report states one of them said, quote, "We're here to help our friends," end quote. This has led to many conspiracy theorists debating if they knew about the attack beforehand and were there to either watch or participate. Friends of the Splatterpunks claimed they had similar plans to get back to their own school because they hated it, and that branches off into a whole bunch of other conspiracies. And the Splatterpunks is a way that the coincidence theorists attempt to debunk. Even though they didn't go into the building, into the high school, they attempt to kind of say people conflated stories. And we will be going over 100 accounts of students in the building who did not identify Klebold or Harris and who knew them. A percentage of which who knew them, and a percentage of whom knew exactly who they identified and were not and claimed vehemently they were not mistaken. So the coincidence theorists, the sham subreddit, the sham moderators at the subreddit, they all pretend and hallucinate that there was some kind of innocent conflation done with the splatterpunks, and there were no other reports of other shooters. And some other posts here. It's kind of an old school rabbit hole of the case which doesn't seem to be explored much anymore. I personally find so many things about the massacre and events surrounding very suspicious. This is one of them. Why would 3 guys dressed in fatigues who knew Eric and Dylan show up at the school during the massacre before it was even broadcast on the radio? And it's actually almost comical how none of these conspiracies are debunked, like these sham subredditors pretend they are, and then even sticky comments at the top to pretend that they were debunked. I mean, all quite comical. So let's jump into one of the only legitimate subreddits left, even though it's been infiltrated by tons of coincidence theorists and authority-worshipping cultists in recent years. Of course, the conspiracy subreddit, r/conspiracy. Toronto's Angry Ghost posted this 3 years ago. I don't know if it's copy-pasted from other areas, but we've heard this repeated many times. We're going to go into the main conspiracy, the multiple shooter theory. Why did over 100 witnesses report seeing more than 2 gunmen or assailants, including an adult, who did not resemble Harris or Klebold? Why was no action taken when over 40 witnesses identified other assailants by name? Why were these other assailants associates of the suspects who had histories of violence, hatred for their peers, and sketchy alibis allowed to walk? One of the most damning things for me, actually, when I was looking into this, is that certain students refused to go back to school when they moved to Chatfield High School nearby. Some of them did not return because they stated they didn't want to go to school with murderers who killed their classmates. I mean, this has all been swept under the rug, but it's so shocking. They were so adamant about who they saw, what they saw, that they just refused to continue going to school because they didn't want to sit next to murderers who killed their classmates. This is their beliefs. Again, the coincidence theorists pretend and hallucinate they're all mistaken, but they feel this strongly about it. I mean, I wasn't there, they were. So the people that were there, you kind of, again, they might be mistaken. Maybe. I mean, if it was only one person, you could make that case. If it was only 2 or 3. You have dozens of people here, as you would expect. And that's a common attempted debunking, however pathetic, by the coincidence theorists, is that if there really were other shooters, there'd be more than 1 or 2 people that saw them. There would have been a ton of people who saw them. Which is exactly what we have. We have over 100 accounts. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, the mountain of evidence for multiple shooters is just astronomical. Okay, so let's go to whatreallyhappened.com. This was posted 8 years after Columbine. It's titled Columbine 8 Years Later. And it just says here, submitted by a reader. There is no name here. Columbine, 101 witnesses. Can't be wrong. And, of course, reference will be made to the 11K report. And this was, of course, Jefferson County's document release, November 21st, 2000. 11,000 pages of witness testimony. Some of it is heavily redacted. And one also has to wonder, what is not released? How many thousands of pages are not released that include even more damning testimony or information than what is released? But the fact that there's so much in what already was released, how can one not question what was not released? But let's continue here. According to the final report of the investigation, only 2 people, Eric Harris, 18, and Dylan Klebold, 17, planned and executed the mass shooting at Columbine High School outside Littleton, Colorado on April 20th, 1999, leaving 15 dead and 23 wounded. But at least 101 eye and ear witnesses remembered it differently. 1. Chris Wisher, sophomore, page 1261. He turned and saw 2 guys carrying shotguns and wearing black trench coats. A third guy wearing a white t-shirt and jeans was seen throwing bombs onto the roof. So we have a third individual spotted by Chris Wisher. Now, to those that saying this was some kind of misinterpretation, we have a video interview with Chris Wisher. Let's listen to it right now.
This is Channel 4 Live. Can you tell us your name, please?
Chris Wisher.
Chris, where were you?
I was in back of the school behind the cafeteria when we heard what sounded like fireworks. So we went back. We started running. We came back. We just figured it was fireworks. We looked up. We saw 2 kids in trench coats with guns and another kid just standing there on the side of the school in white. We saw him. One of them turned at us, started shooting.
Toward you?
Yeah, towards us. We were probably 100 yards away. We fell to the ground, and then the bullets stopped. I don't know what he was doing. He might have been reloading or something. So we got back up. We looked over. We saw the kid in the white throwing the bombs on top of the school. He's some kind of grenade or something. I don't know what it was.
And he was dressed in white?
He was wearing a white shirt, yes. And I don't know whether he was armed or not with a gun. And at that time, we just ran.
Please don't give us any names, but did you recognize these students?
Yeah, I thought I recognized one of them.
As a current student?
Yeah.
Okay, glad you're okay. Have you reconnected with your mom and dad?
Yeah, I've talked to them. They're probably watching right now.
Well, I hope you're okay. Thanks so much for talking, Carol. You know, we're with Chris. You're one of the ones who said you saw the gunman shooting at you.
Yes.
Correct? He was shooting at you.
Yeah.
Now, you say you saw police just arrest him?
Well,
Please don't give us a name on the air, but go ahead and tell us what happened.
He got in a black police car. Police had a lot of security around him. It's the kid that I've seen around school a lot. I'm pretty sure that's him. I'm not gonna say it's a 100% guarantee that was him, but I'm almost positive it was.
Is he the one you believe was shooting at you on the playground today?
Yes, I believe it was.
How can we misinterpret that? Chris Wisher here is stating that the third suspect was arrested, or possibly another shooting suspect, another shooter was arrested. He is stating here he saw the shooter. Now, he does say he's not 100% positive, but he's stating that he saw somebody shooting at him get arrested. Curious.
Was he dressed in a trench coat?
Yeah. Well, when they just took him away, he wasn't, but he was there.
Was he handcuffed?
Yeah.
Was he talking? Were police...
He was just quiet.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. I know that's emotional for you. I'm sorry you're upset. Thanks so much for talking to us. Again, he describes the situation where they were out on the grounds of the school at lunchtime, that this person in a trench coat started shooting directly at them. They hit the ground, and then they just came running up to say that they saw that particular person. They believe that particular suspect was just loaded into a police car. Christina Yao is here. Maybe you can...
Okay, so you could say he's mistaken, but the coincidence theorist pretending and hallucinating that something was lost in translation, we have it here on video. Not all of the news footage was completely scrubbed. Some of it is still available on the internet. Some of it was FOIA'd, some of it was gotten by various researchers, some of it was simply archived. There was a lot more on YouTube back in the day, years and years ago. Most of it has been scrubbed. Most of the questionable stuff has been scrubbed, coincidentally. But some of it remains. Some of it was saved by people and re-uploaded. So that is Chris Wisher's account. In no uncertain terms, he is clearly stating there were 3 individuals, one of them in a white t-shirt and jeans, now he didn't mention the jeans in this video interview, but it's mentioned in the 11K report, that this individual was throwing grenades, and he's saying another individual who was shooting at him was just arrested. He does state he's not 100% positive, but he believes it was this individual. Who knows? Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but we have it from his mouth. So all the coincidence theorists out there, there's no misinterpretation here. This is what he stated. So let's look at through the 11K documents. This is interview with Chris Wisher on 4/20/99 at about 1600, 10 hours. I was contacted by Chris Wisher in the parking lot of Clement Park. Wisher stated he had already been interviewed previously, but that he wished to contact me and provide me with further information. And this is written by reporting officer Moore. So Wisher is going to the officer with further info because he identified an individual, not Klebold and Harris. So here it is. Wisher stated that he was behind the school by the cafeteria when he heard what he thought was fireworks going off. Wisher said he saw two kids in trench coats and described one of the kids as wearing a white t-shirt and throwing bombs on the school. So two kids in trench coats, one kid not in a trench coat t-shirt throwing bombs. Wisher said he was not positive, but he believed one of the suspects was redacted. Wisher said that the other kid in the trench coat fired a shotgun at him and that at this time he knew what was going on was real. And just for clarification, Klebold and Harris's names are not redacted. So when there are redacted names, also the length of the words of redacted are various lengths as well. So you can kind of see that he's not talking about Klebold or Harris in certain situations when Klebold or Harris is also mentioned in the same sentence that is not redacted. Wisher stated that the other suspect in the trench coat had an automatic rifle. Wisher stated that after the incident started, he ran from the scene through a field and waved down a car and went to someone's house and called 911. Wisher stated that his first interview was in more detail as to what occurred at this time. Wisher stated the reason he wished to contact me was the fact that a reporter had contacted him while he was standing outside the crime scene tape, and the reporter knew that Wisher had been interviewed by law enforcement officers. He stated the reporter asked him if the kid that was sitting in the red van being interviewed by law enforcement officials was one of the suspects. Note, the person in the red van being interviewed was redacted. Wisher stated that the reporter asked him to go up to the van and look and see if that was one of the suspects and to let him know. Wisher stated he looked at redacted and then told the reporter that it looked like one of the suspects, but he could not tell him for sure if it was. I then asked Wisher if the person in the van was one of the suspects he saw. He told me that redacted looked like one of them, but he could not tell me it was one of them. He stated he was unsure if this was the same person he had seen in the parking lot. Many speculate he's talking about Brooks Brown here, and that it was also not the person in the white shirt, which was an older individual in their 30s, according to others. Again, I'm just mixing and matching here to see who saw what. This is the FBI document that follows here. Again, you can find this all in the 11K reports. This was dated April 28, 1999. April 27, 1999, Christopher Howard Wisher, date of birth March 1983, of his address, Littleton, Colorado, telephone number, stated his telephone number here, was interviewed at this residence in the presence of his father, Howard E. Wisher, date of birth April 12, 1949. After advisement of the identity of the interviewing agent and the nature of the interview, he provided the following information. Wisher is a sophomore at Columbine High School. He normally eats lunch during fourth period, which he has free, and at the end of the period at 11:10, he and his friends normally go outside. On April 20th, 1999, just prior to the 11:15 bell, he and his friends, Jake Abodaka, Josh Chavez, and John, last name unknown. That's curious. The FBI doesn't even know the last names of the student, and they couldn't verify with the yearbook. Weird. We're sitting at a table inside the cafeteria near the south window, which faces a parking lot. Wisher saw Dylan Klebold walk into the southwest entrance to the cafeteria from the parking lot. He was dressed all in black, with black trousers, black shirt, black boots, a black trench coat, and a black Colorado Avalanche hat worn backwards, which had a Boston Red Sox emblem sewn on it. Wisher does not recall Klebold carrying anything and saw him walk over to the vending machines in the cafeteria. According to Wisher, during lunch, Klebold and Eric Harris would normally sit in Klebold's BMW in the parking lot on the south side of the cafeteria and watch people. Wisher only knows Klebold and Harris by sight, so he knows Klebold and Harris and what they look like. He's not friends with them personally. He doesn't know them, as they're stating here. He's not good friends with them or anything. He only knows them, basically who they are in general, and can identify from a distance. After the 11:15 bell, Wisher and his friends walked out of the southwest exit of the cafeteria towards the soccer field. He heard a sound which sounded like fireworks, similar to a string of Black Cat firecrackers going off. Wisher indicated that prior to April 20th, 1999, he had never heard gunfire. About 50 yards away, outside on the west side of the cafeteria, he saw a tall, white male dressed all in black with a black trench coat and what he thinks was a black hat and dark sunglasses. At the time, he did not recognize this person, but thought it might be redacted. A member of the Trenchcoat Mafia who is about the same height and build. And to all the coincidence theorists and those attempting to rewrite the narrative of Columbine, the official narrative, the Trenchcoat Mafia being a myth was kind of instituted as well, but you'll hear many, many students refer to the Trenchcoat Mafia and members of the Trenchcoat Mafia. So to the goofs that try to pretend the Trenchcoat Mafia never even existed, that's quite silly. Now, supposedly, Eric Harrison, Dylan Klebold were not official members of the Trenchcoat Mafia. They simply were friends with members of the Trenchcoat Mafia. So, and they hung out with members of the Trenchcoat Mafia. So to those saying the Trenchcoat Mafia wasn't even real, you have countless references. It's in all the FBI reports, the police reports, the eyewitnesses who were present, who actually went to the school and were familiar with the Trenchcoat Mafia and Trenchcoat Mafia members. So all of this information, the devout coincidence theorists and authority-worshipping cultists who believed whatever they saw in the idiot box for the rewritten narrative, some of them maintained there's no Trenchcoat Mafia. Okay. So Wisher saw this person shoot at 3 students near the southwest corner of the cafeteria with what he thinks was a shotgun based upon the loud noise and the slower rate of fire. This shooter then pointed the shotgun at Wisher and his friends and fired 4 or 5 shots at them. Wisher and his friends fell to the ground, covered their heads. When Wisher looked up, he saw the gunman walking towards the southwest cafeteria entrance. Wisher also saw a white male dressed in a white short-sleeved t-shirt and blue jeans kneeling with his back to him near the northwest corner of the cafeteria. He did not recognize this person, and since his back was to him, could only tell he had either light brown or blonde hair. This person had no weapon nor other gear visible. Wisher saw this person throw an object one-handed on top of the cafeteria library roof. It appeared metallic with sunlight glinting off of it. 1 or 2 seconds after landing, it exploded with a loud bang, a flash of fire, and a pall of smoke. While he observed the person in the black trench coat shooting outside and the person in the white t-shirt throwing the explosive device, he also heard very rapid gunfire coming from somewhere within the school. Let me read that part again. While he observed the person in the black trench coat shooting outside and the person in the white t-shirt throwing the explosive device, he also heard very rapid gunfire coming from somewhere within the school. Wisher was unable to see who was doing the shooting or tell exactly from where inside the school it was coming from. After this person threw the bomb, Wisher and his friends got up and ran to a nearby house on Teller Street, where Wisher called his father to let him know he was safe. Howard Wisher indicated he noted the time of the call as 11:20 a.m. Wisher knows 2 members of the Trenchcoat Mafia, Joe Stair, a former Columbine student who graduated last year, and Chris Morris. He spoke with Morris once about the sport of paintball, which they both play. Wisher indicated Morris normally sits by himself at a table on the south side of the cafeteria near the window, but he cannot recall if he saw him in the cafeteria on April 20th, 1999. So that's actually quite curious because I don't know if Morris and Joe Stair's names are not redacted because they're not being accused here. They're simply members of the Trenchcoat Mafia. They're not directly named. I don't know if these particular names are redacted elsewhere where they're being accused of being shooters. That's unclear to me, so I don't know what to make of that, because I believe other individuals named Joe Stair and Chris Morris as shooters, and they might have those names redacted elsewhere, but in this particular area of the document, it's curious because does that mean Wisher is not referring to either one of them, since it's just curious the way that it would be written into this report. Now, what's also curious in some of these follow-up reports, including with Wisher, apparently he's being convinced by investigators because he's shown pictures of Harris and, coincidentally, one of the agents is Special Agent Harris. I'm assuming no relation to Eric Harris. This is Special Agent Matthew Harris, who first interviewed Christopher Wisher. And they showed him all these pictures. And again, this is all in the report here. Wisher stated he was almost positive it was not redacted. Then the investigator told Wisher that redacted was not at the school at the beginning of the incident. Wisher replied, "Then I guess it is not him." So is this a weird attempt, not necessarily at intimidation, but at controlling the narrative after the fact? Because this follow-up report is October 13th, 1999. I mean, this is months and months later. The incident is no longer fresh in his mind, and the investigator might be telling him the guy that he identified was not at the school. We also don't know the tone of this interview. Because if this is an intimidation-type interview where they're trying to get him to change his story, either way, the original reports, the original accounts, he's clearly stating he knew both Klebold and Harris. He's clearly stating that the other individual is not them. He's clearly stating there are 3 individuals. He's also stating that while 2 of the individuals were in his view, someone else was shooting inside the school. Maybe he's mistaken about all of it. Maybe. Maybe he is. But that's just the first of over 100 accounts. So let's move on now to Jake Apodaca, sophomore. This is on page 653, which we'll go over in a moment. He was at the soccer field, heard firecrackers. He turned and saw 2 guys carrying shotguns, wearing black trench coats and black t-shirts. A third guy, wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, was seen throwing bombs onto the roof. So, like Chris Wisher, Apodaca saw the exact same thing. So now we have verification. So this isn't one individual being mistaken or being panicked and not knowing what they saw. Here, in the second account, we have a second individual clearly stating this. And guess what? We also have a video of an interview with Apodaca. Let's listen to it.
Just if I could identify any of the gunmen.
Because tell me you actually saw the gunman and they were firing at you and your group?
Yeah.
Describe that scene. And
well, me and my friend Chris were just out during lunch by the student parking lot, and we heard what sounded like firecrackers, and so we looked over and we saw some guys with guns creeping around a corner, and we thought it was like a senior prank or something, so we just kept watching to see what they were going to do. And we saw him shoot 3 kids, and so we started going back on the soccer field, and he looked at us and then he started shooting at us, and so we fell to the ground, and then we got back up after he started shooting, and we saw a guy in a white t-shirt throw some bombs or something on the top of the school.
Did they appear to be targeting certain students or just whoever was in their path?
It didn't really look like they were aiming at kids. It just looked like they were just kind of shooting randomly.
And tell me what police officers were asking you.
They just wanted to know if I got a good look or if I knew who the shooters were.
Please don't tell me their names, but were you able to identify them? Did you recognize them?
Yeah, one of them. The main gunman I did recognize.
And he's a student at your school?
Yeah.
You have your yearbook here. Is that because police asked you to identify people?
Yeah.
Who were they asking you to identify?
Just any of the gunmen that I recognized.
And were you able to find their pictures in the yearbook for them?
I didn't find the gunmen's, but I found some people's pictures in there that usually hang out with them and are part of the Trenchcoat Mafia.
People keep talking about this. How large a group is this at your school?
About 10, 15 kids, something like that.
All boys?
Yeah.
And how long have they been in existence? Is it a new thing?
Well, ever since I been going to Columbine,
This is how long?
2 years.
So they've been here since that time?
Yeah, as far as I know.
And are they well known?
Yeah, pretty much.
And what do they do?
They don't really do anything. They just keep to themselves, and they just stick out because they always wear black clothes and dark and long trench coats and army clothes and stuff like that.
Okay, well, we're glad you're okay. Thanks for talking with us. Appreciate it. Again, we've seen...
So, clear report there. Also clear references to the Trenchcoat Mafia, a group of individuals, a dozen or so, by another student who went to Columbine, who experienced this and who knew these individuals. So he noticed them, and then also another individual, white shirt, jeans, throwing bombs on the roof. So here we have page 653 of the 11K. This is the Littletown Police Department report, Jacob Apodaca. at soccer field with a friend, heard what sounded like firecrackers, saw 3 subjects near school shooting. One threw bombs onto the roof of a school. Subject shotgun toward him and his friend. He and his friend ran into a house, called 911. He saw a gunman duck down with a shotgun in the Weaver Park. Subjects were white male, 2 wearing black trench coats, black berets, black pants, black army boots, black t-shirts, carrying shotguns. He has seen these 2 at school before, but did not find them in the yearbook he was shown. The 3rd subject had light brown hair, wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, throwing bombs onto the roof, saw one explode. Apodaca has not seen him at the school before. So again, he's saying the same thing as Chris Wisher. 2 of the guys he's familiar with. The 3rd guy he's never seen before. Now, here's the thing. A lot of the coincidence theorists think that since Eric Harris entered with a trench coat, then took the trench coat off, he was mistaken for a 3rd guy. Whereas clearly he's being seen at the same time as the 3rd guy. Clearly it's being stated that the 3rd subject was never seen at the school before. So Eric Harris, with or without a trench coat, is a guy that's been at the school before, and there's no way to misinterpret this. No matter how hard the coincidence theorists pretend and hallucinate to try to soothe their dissonance that the official narrative has to be true, and there's no chance it's not true, we have clear contradictory evidence, and we're only on report 2 of over 100. Now, what's curious in this handwritten statement, names, so the Trenchcoat Mafia, so this is not redacted. Okay, so he's clearly stated that these Trenchcoat Mafia members were not the gunmen. Robert Perry, Brian Sargent, Joseph Stair, and Thaddeus Bowles. Curious indeed, because other individuals did identify these as the shooters. This is the FBI's report here, February 20th, 1999. April 27th, 99, Jacob Anthony Apodaca was interviewed in the presence of Howard E. Wisher with the permission of his mother, Vicky Apodaca. After advisement of the identity of the interviewing agent and the nature of the interview, he provided the following information. Apodaca is a sophomore, Columbine High School, April 20th, 99 at 11:10 a.m., which is the end of the 4th period. He went to the cafeteria to meet his friends, Chris Wisher, Josh Chavez, and John, last name unknown. So there's a John here, they don't know. So neither Wisher nor Apodaca know the last name of the John that they're friends with, and the FBI cannot produce a yearbook for them to identify this other John. I don't know what to make of that, but let's continue. Just prior to the 11:15 bell, while sitting at a table near the south window in the cafeteria, he saw Dylan Klebold walk into the cafeteria through the southwest entrance. He was dressed all black, black boots, black trousers, black shirt, black trench coat, and was wearing a backwards hat with a Boston Red Sox emblem. Apodaca knew Klebold only by sight and indicated that during lunch he normally sat in the BMW in the parking lot on the south side of the cafeteria. Apodaca and his friends walked out of the southwest exit of the cafeteria towards the soccer field. He heard what sounded like a string of firecrackers going off and turned towards the school and saw 2 white males crouching along the northwest corner of the cafeteria. One person who was dressed in a white short-sleeved shirt, blue jeans, no weapon visible. The other person was dressed all black, black trousers, black shirt, black trench coat, black beret, and was wearing what appeared to be a black mask. Curious. And that's another curious thing. There's random reports of people wearing masks as the shooters as well. He did not recognize either of these individuals, since one had on a mask and the person in the white t-shirt because he was crouched down with his back to him. Apodaca saw the person in the white t-shirt throw an object about the size of a soda can on top of the library. This object appeared metallic since it looked silver in the sunlight. 1 or 2 seconds after landing on the roof, it exploded with a loud boom, flash of fire, puff of smoke. He then threw a second object on the roof, which also exploded. After the second device exploded, the person dressed in the black trench coat walked west from the northwest side of the cafeteria and shot at 3 students near the southwest corner of the cafeteria with what Apodaca believes was a shotgun. After shooting at these 3 people, the shooter fired 4 or 5 times at Apodaca and his friends, who were about 40 to 50 yards away. They fell to the ground, and after the shooter entered the school through the southwest cafeteria entrance, they got up and ran to a nearby house on Teller Court. Apodaca knew who Eric Harris was, but never talked with him. He knows 2 other members of the Trenchcoat Mafia, Joe Stair, who graduated from Columbine High School last year, and Chris Morris. During lunch, Morris usually sits by himself at a table on the south side of the cafeteria, but he cannot recall if he saw Morris there on April 20th, 1999. According to Apodaca, the audiovisual class transmits a phrase of the day over the school television system each day at the end of the second period. Apodaca recalls the phrase of the day on April 20th, 1999, which was broadcast on televisions in each classroom, appeared to be written in German. He later heard from other friends this phrase of the day was transmitted by Trenchcoat Mafia members in the audiovisual class and was translated to mean, "Today is the day you wish you weren't here." Now that's creepy on a lot of levels. That does point to insider knowledge, maybe. This is actually the first I've heard that it was written in German. I don't know if people are misremembering. The coincidence theorists always want to rewrite everything. I would surmise that the closer to the time of the event would be the most accurate. I mean, even this FBI report was written on the 28th regarding the interview on the 27th, whereas the original police report was day of. So that's just keep in mind. So if there was some kind of cover-up, conspiracy, intimidation to change stories, that was not apparent initially, and it could have been done after the fact. And a lot of the so-called follow-up interviews months later, or even weeks later, they're quite curious because they seem to be quite different from the original reports. But let's continue here. Jonathan Cole, freshman. This is page 749. He noticed 2 tall guys in black trench coats. He saw a third male wearing a white t-shirt, blue jeans. This person looked over to the other 2 suspects and yelled, "Go, go." So not only did Apodaca back up Wisher on everything, including the 3 individuals, now we have another individual, Jonathan Cole. It'd be curious if he was the one with Chris and Jake. We'll look over that in a moment. But he saw all 3 suspects, and he saw the third one yell to the other 2, "Go, go." Now, no matter how devout of a coincidence theorist you are, if you're going to hallucinate that all these people are mistaken simply because Eric Harris took off a trench coat and they thought they were 3 people, how does that explain a witness clearly seeing a third individual speak to Dylan and Eric? I mean, does that make any sense to anybody? Like, how, even the most devout coincidence theorist, how do you explain that? You could say that Jonathan Cole is lying, that he's misremembering, but you cannot say he mistook Eric Harris for 2 individuals, because he's seeing 3 at the same time. So let's go to page 749. Witness Jonathan Justin Cole. And action taken here. This is June 1st, 1999. Reporting agent Linda Holloway and CBI agent Jerry Means meet with Jonathan Cole and his parents at Columbine High School. I had spoken briefly with Jonathan to schedule a meeting and learned that he believed he saw 3 males involved in shooting guns and throwing bombs at Columbine High School April 20th, 1999. He was asked to relay the events as he remembered them of that day. Jonathan walked to school, arriving at 7:15 a.m. He was with friends Jake Apodaca and Chris Wisher. So it looks like this, according to this, he's that John that they couldn't identify immediately. And we have some more information here. After arriving at school, he went to his first period gym class where he played dodgeball. Fellow student Brooks Brown is in his gym class and was present on April 20th. He talked with Brown during class and recalled that he was wearing brown boots or black boots, black pants, and a brown shirt. So does that mean, if this is all accurate, does that mean Chris Wisher was not referring to Brooks Brown as the other shooter? He then went to his second period class. Mr. Sanders was his teacher, and Sanders talked about his family during the class. Cole then attended Mrs. White's science class during third period. Between third and fourth period, he saw Brooks Brown. He talked with him briefly and saw him walk out the front door next to the office on the east side of the building. On his way to Cole's fourth period class, he passed by Brooks Brown's fourth period class and observed that Brown was not seated at his usual desk next to the door. During a walk to the school, Brown's fourth period class is in room SS2. And for those that don't know, Eric Harris is the one who walked by Brooks Brown and told him to go home, thus sparing his life, according to the official narrative, according to Brooks Brown. Now, we obviously, I don't know if we have anybody else's word for that other than Brooks Brown. There may or may not have been a witness to that interaction, but that witness would have been from a distance off, so they would not necessarily be able to corroborate what was said between them. And if Brooks Brown is somehow part of this, again, I'm not alleging he is or he is not. This is Mindshock, where the only thing we know for sure is we don't know anything for sure. But if he was, obviously, he would make up a story like that to make him appear innocent. Okay, continuing on here. Jonathan showed us his route through the halls from his locker and past room SS2 that he takes every day on his way to fourth period class in room LA13. It was observed that Brooks Brown's desk can be readily seen through the 3x3 window in the door. His desk is usually the closest to the door. Not all of the classroom is visible to someone walking by and casually looking through the window or through the open door. The only other significant information that he shared about Brooks Brown is that he smokes Camel cigarettes. Cole finished his fourth period class and walked out of the school via the doors located on the upper level just north of the library on the west side. He met up with Jack Apodaca and Chris Wisher when he noticed two males in trench coats. One was wearing a ski mask with one large hole in it. Both were tall and believed that they had just come through the same doors that he exited from. He did not recall them wearing hats, however. It was his perception that one had a white shirt on under his trench coat and one was wearing a black shirt and a black or dark pants or jeans. He recalled that one had brown, puffy hair. Now, another curiosity is that, so Eric Harris wasn't particularly tall when compared to Dylan Klebold. So Dylan Klebold was 6'3", so that's really tall. Now, would you call a guy standing next to him that's closer to 5'8"-ish tall? Maybe. I mean, he's not super short. I'm sure there were guys in the high school probably closer to 5 feet, 5'4", 5'5", and under that. So would 5'8" be tall? Possibly. So a Columbine site said he was 5'6.5". His license says he's 5'7". The autopsy says 5'8.5". So if we just round all that around, I mean, maybe that would be about between 5'7" and 5'8". Also, some believe that he was very insecure about his height. He apparently listed his height as like 5'11" on some online websites or whatever. So, yeah. But what's curious is that Dylan's height the autopsy matches his driver's license, and Eric's autopsy does not. So, I mean, it's possible, I guess, he grew more. But either way, it's not enough to give us a ton of information with two tall guys. But, I don't know, in a lot of the you can clearly tell one guy is shorter than the other from a distance. I don't know, again, depending on the distance, but Dylan at 6'3", I mean, I don't know if you would call both of them super tall, and Dylan usually does tower over just about everybody. So it's a weird optic. It's a weird optic. Unless these are not, I mean, I don't know who's he describing here with the mask. So either way, let's continue here. The two males walked to the corner of the building, stood off the sidewalk looking down the steps that led to the cafeteria and senior parking lot. He recalled seeing a third male who was wearing a white t-shirt that had either short sleeves or no sleeves, blue jeans, exit the building behind the two trenched males. So he's clearly stating he sees two guys in trench coats at the same time as the third guy in the white shirt. He next remembered that the male in the white shirt yelled at the other two males in trench coats to go. He then observed the two males with the trench coats draw weapons. One pulled a shotgun, one pulled a large semi-auto gun. They began shooting at students below. He recalled hearing kids scream and one student fall to the ground. He began to run in a westerly direction. He recalled looking back and seeing the male in the white shirt throw what he believed were bombs on the roof area of the library. He thought that he threw 4 or 5 bombs and that some exploded. He and his two friends were shot at by the gunman. They dropped to the grass at one point and then got up and ran as fast as they could away from the school. He believed that they were near a fence when he heard bullets whiz by his head. They ran to the safety of a nearby residence. Jonathan Cole related that when he went back to pick up his backpack and other belongings that he had left at the school with his mother today, that he saw a male that reminded him of the male in the white shirt who was throwing bombs. Wow! This is mind-shocking. His male was described as 5'10", wearing black sunglasses and having collar-length blondish brown hair. He did not know that student's name. So he's stating that there's a particular student, I guess they were doing interviews that day, follow-up interviews, on June 1st, 1999. He's stating that this other student is here. Or reminded him of this. That's curious. But his report with the third suspect in the white shirt, some of the conspiracies allege this guy's reported as being in his 30s or much older than a high school student. Not by these accounts that we went over so far, by other accounts that we'll get to. Some allege that this guy was their handler. And if this was some kind of covert op, and they were being either MK Ultra'd or something, they had some kind of a handler for this operation, and this individual was the handler. Others surmised this was some kind of Trenchcoat Mafia occult situation that had nothing to do with the government, and there were much older members of cults. And we'll be going down a lot of rabbit holes, because there's a lot of mind-shocking rabbit holes, including known connections to occult members and just really wacky stuff that obviously has never been covered in the mainstream. But it's curious that he saw a male that reminded him of the male in the white shirt who was throwing the bombs. He did not know that student's name. He was shown 12 photographic lineup that have been prepared by the task force. He was not able to identify the person he saw dressed in the white t-shirt and throwing bombs on April 20th. He was not close enough to observe facial details of the males wearing the trench coats. A drawing was made from information supplied by Jonathan of the area and approximate distances where he saw the gunman. He was about 73 to 75 feet away from the gunman as they walked from the west doors to the position where they drew guns and began firing. Photographs were taken in this area, Jonathan's view from where he was standing, where he observed the gunman. Various comments were noted on the 12 photographic lineups that Jonathan said he looked at the pictures. He noted that the people he thought he had seen associating with the Trenchcoat Mafia. He pointed to Klebold and Harris's pictures and stated that he had seen them in the A lunch period. He pointed to the photograph 1 of lineup H, stating that he knows this male as Sarge, and that he believes he's the leader of the Trenchcoat Mafia. In the same photo lineup, he pointed to photograph 2 and said that he was a tall, fat kid and may have a double-pierced eyebrow, and that he has been seen sporting pickhead and wears chains and needles in his shoes. He believes that this kid smokes. The 12 lineup will also be included with this report. Jonathan Cole gave the telephone numbers of Jake Abadaka and Chris Wisher. Both of reports of their interviews were reviewed, and both indicate that they saw only one gunman with a trench coat and a black shirt, and one male with a white shirt who was throwing bombs on the roof. These reports are included also. So that's a deliberate lie right there, because we just went over their reports. They clearly did not say that. Jonathan Cole had attended Columbine High School for only 2 months prior to the incident. He has been homeschooled prior to and since the shooting. Curious indeed. Curious indeed. Would he be harder to intimidate if he wasn't part of the whole Columbine situation? Because if there was something to do with the Trenchcoat Mafia and all of these other things, death education, some huge conspiracy with the school, would it be easier to get long-standing members of the school to go along versus a newer guy like Jonathan Cole? I don't know. It's just very curious that he clearly stated he saw 3. Not only that, he clearly stated he saw the guy in the white t-shirt talk to the other 2 trench-coated guys. So, again, do the coincidence theorists pretend he just didn't know what he saw? He was mistaken? It's just really, really weird. And we'll be getting into the possible people named that were other shooters and individuals that knew the other named shooters and Klebold and Harris and could clearly distinguish between them, and witnesses in the school that saw these individuals from very close range, because these first three guys, they were a little bit of a distance, even though they're fairly certain Klebold and or Harris were definitely who they saw, which is curious as well. Okay, number 4, William Arap Kyles, freshman, page 660. He states that he was at the soccer field and heard firecrackers. He turned and saw 3 people near the west entrance. 2 were wearing black trench coats and carrying guns. The third was wearing a white t-shirt and no visible gun. The person in the white t-shirt was pacing back and forth about 5 feet away from the 2 gunmen. Curious. Yet another witness to the same scene. So he's seeing all 3 at the same time, clearly debunking the coincidence theorist attempted debunking by stating that the third individual was Eric Harris without a trench coat. And so this report here in the 11K is written on May 5th, 1999, which is curious. On May 5th, this was written by investigative agent Gerson is listed, as well as Timothy Steffes. May 5th, 99, I interviewed William Billy Arap Kyles. Billy is a student at Columbine High School and was in the vicinity of the cafeteria at the time of the shootings. I learned about Billy while speaking to his mother about an interview with Billy's sister, Amanda Arap Kyles. Billy reported that he was actually on the soccer field located to the southwest of the cafeteria during the shootings. Billy stated that he had been in the cafeteria between 11 and 11:10 a.m. to see if his other sister, Amy, was going out to lunch. When he found out she had already left for lunch, he then went looking for a soccer ball to play soccer with. When he located the ball, he went to the field where he played with some other students. Billy related that about 5 minutes after he began playing soccer, he heard what sounded like fireworks going off in the area of the cafeteria. Billy said he and others on the field began to cheer and shout, thinking it was a prank. He said that he looked toward the school and observed 3 people near the west entrance to the North Main Hall. Billy stated that 2 of the subjects were wearing trench coats. The third was wearing a white shirt. According to Billy, the 2 subjects wearing the trench coats had guns. He did not see the subject with the white shirt with the firearm. Billy related that the subject wearing the white shirt was pacing back and forth, was about 5 feet away from the other 2 in the trench coats. Billy did not think the subject wearing the white shirt was a victim, but was with the other 2. Billy reported he was too far away to recognize the subjects. And that's curious, too, because other so-called debunkers, coincidence theorists, they somehow think that the other guy might have been a victim, but he's throwing bombs on the roof. That's weird. The other thing is, people who aren't there, there's a certain energy and body language that you can use to even subconsciously to kind of tell, like even if you look at a gang, who's with who. And he seems, this individual, Billy, got the impression that this individual was with the other 2, explicitly stating that he did not think the subject wearing the white shirt was a victim. Billy continued to say that while he was watching the subjects that were shooting at the ground, the subjects were shooting at the ground and into the air. He continued to say that he observed the subjects in the trench coats shoot one person near the top of the outside stairs leading from the cafeteria to the west entrance to the North Hall. He saw them shoot a second person at the bottom of the hill near the cafeteria and a third as the victim was trying to run away across the student parking lot. At about this time, the shooters noticed the people on the soccer field and began firing at them. Billy reported that during the shooting, he believes that a long gun one of the shooters had jammed as there was a pause in the firing. He observed the shooter making a rearward pulling action at the gun like he was cocking a crossbow. Billy reported that he got down on his hands and knees and crawled across the soccer field to the fence on the west edge of the field and jumped the fence into the backyard of a house. Billy reported that he and several students took shelter in this residence. Billy reported that from this residence he dialed 911, reported the shootings. Billy said that while he was in the cafeteria, he did not see anything like a duffel bag on the floor, and no one carried such a bag into the cafeteria while he was there. Billy further advised that none of the subjects he saw during the shooting were carrying a duffel bag. Billy reported that he's a freshman. He had no additional information, and the interview concluded at 0900. Okay. Just yet another witness making his report crystal clear. Now, you can say he was on hallucinogenics. You can make the claim. There's no evidence of that. But you cannot claim he simply mistook a third individual for Eric Harris without a trench coat, because he's seeing them all three at the same time. He's seeing the two trench-coated figures with guns and the third white shirt and jeans figure pacing near them. Is this an older individual, a handler, kind of nervous before all this is going into action? Is he questioning what he's about to unleash here? Because that's a curious detail. This individual's pacing back and forth. Or does he have an earpiece and is he waiting for a signal in order to give the signal to the two trench-coated figures? All right, let's move on to number 5. Channel 7 News at 12 noon on April 20th, reporter said numerous witnesses he spoke to who were not named said they saw 3 gunmen. That's curious. Is he talking about Wisher and Apodaca? I mean, we'll get to more, of course, here, but Lindsay Elmore Jr. from page 332. I believe there were 3 gunmen. Page 340. There was so much movement that Elmore thought there was more than 2 people. So this might be more of a fuzzy account. Now, the ones we went over were crystal clear, definitive accounts of 3 individuals. Now let's move on to Lindsay Elmore. So this is dated April 23rd, 1999. Her handwritten statement is dated April 20th, 1999. April 21st, 1999, RI called and spoke with Lindsay Elmore, a student of Columbine High School. On April 20th, 1999, Lindsay Elmore was interviewed by a Detective Zimmer of the Denver Police Department. In Lindsay's written report, she made comment that she believed there were 3 gunmen. Let's go through her written statement. First, we heard gunfire, which nobody noticed because it sounded like hammering. A frantic woman ran in and shouted, "Help, help! There are kids with guns out there and they shot a kid." She began to dial 911 and yelled, "Everybody get on the floor." Everybody got underneath the tables in the library. We soon felt the floor shaking because of the explosives below us. Multiple explosions, rapid gunfire, and people screaming could be heard. Some people sobbed quietly. After a long time, the gunmen came up into the library. They began in the west side of the library and came upon the hiding students. They chose a boy and said, "So are you a jock boy?" and fired on him, and next said something about being black and shot another student believed to be black. They continued to fire randomly and seemed to fire towards the windows and metal beams. Next, they moved to the far east side of the library and began to fire again. The shot seemed to be rapid, maybe automatic. They began to talk to a girl and said, "Do you believe in God?" who was whimpering and crying, but answered yes. And they asked, "Why do you believe in God?" She stammered something about because of her parents, and fired at her many times. They began to come towards the middle section. I was facing north, and they were behind me. They yelled to each other about needing new clips, and one said, "We'd always wanted to kill someone with a knife." A boy at the table in front of me and to the right moved, and he was fired on at least 5 times. And one of them said, so he tried to jump ya nonchalantly. After that, they headed to the front of the library and knocked over a computer and then left. Before they shot the boy next to him, one of the gunmen noticed the boy and said, "Hey, John Savage, what are you doing here? You better get out and we're going to blow the library up." They allowed him to leave and he ran out. I believe there were 3 gunmen. Curious. So there's a lot of details here, including the conflated "Do you believe in God" story, which is attributed to Rachel Joy Scott, the Rachel Joy Scott encounter, but apparently this happened in the library, according to this witness. And Rachel Joy Scott was, of course, not in the library, but a Christian. Okay. All right. So clearly stated there were 3 gunmen. Now back to the supplemental report, which was from the 23rd. So the reporting investigator asked Lindsay if it would be all right if I stopped by to discuss her written statement. Okay. Lindsay said it would be fine. At approximately 2:50 p.m., met with Lindsay at her residence, Littleton, Colorado. We went over the contents of her written statement, which she advised was accurate. Lindsay advised that she was in the library on her lunch hour and sat next to a Rebecca that is in her Spanish class. Lindsay stated that she heard a loud noise outside but thought it was construction of some sort. A few seconds later, a frantic woman came into the library. The elderly woman was screaming, "Help, help, there are boys outside with guns. Someone has been shot." The elderly woman and a Mr. Long yelled for everyone to get on the floor under the tables. Lindsay stated that she immediately got on the floor underneath a table. The suspects eventually came into the library. Lindsay advised that she heard one of the suspects say, "So you are a jock boy." Lindsay advised that they then shot the boy. Lindsay stated that she heard something about being black and then shot another student. Lindsay stated that they continued to shoot people. Lindsay stated that she heard one of the suspects ask a girl, "Do you believe in God?" The girl replied, "Yes." The suspect then said, "Why do you believe in God?" Lindsay stated that the girl said something about because of her parents. The suspect or suspects then shot the girl. Lindsay stated that she was in the middle of the room and was facing north. They came toward the middle of the room from behind her. Lindsay stated that one of the suspects yelled about needing new clips. Another suspect said he always wanted to kill someone with a knife. Lindsay stated that a boy at the table in front of her apparently moved and was shot at least 5 times. One of the suspects said, "So he tried to jump ya." The suspects walked back towards the front of the library, knocked over a computer, and then left. Lindsay stated that prior to the shooting, the boy next to her, one of the suspects said, "Hey, John Savage, what are you doing here? You had better get out. We're going to blow the library up." Lindsay stated that the boy got up and left. RI asked Lindsay Elmore if she ever saw the suspects. Lindsay replied, "No. I didn't want to move and was only able to see shadows." Investigator asked why in her written statement did she make the comment, "I believe there were 3 gunmen." Lindsay stated, "Because of the amount of shots fired, I thought there had to be more than 2 shooters." Lindsay Elmore is fairly certain that John Savage came into the library shortly after her and before the shooting started. Lindsay provided investigator with a copy of a journal she drafted after the shooting. No further. So what's curious, did they specifically ask her how many shadows did she see? Did she see 3 distinct shadows? And what about hearing footsteps too? I mean, could she, obviously, if you're in a room, you could do an experiment. Now, if you're in a state of panic, I mean, all of this is tough to recall. But just for reference, you could obviously tell if there are 3 individuals versus 2 based on footprints and movement. She's stating it's based on the rate of fire of the guns. Now, the guns were not fully automatic weapons that Klebold and Eric Harris allegedly used, according to the official narrative. I mean, all of this is obviously very traumatizing, but would a better investigation include simulating the experience, not even necessarily in the library or in a room exactly like the library, but having 3 individuals with semi-auto fire, having the 3 individuals standing close to each other and having them spread out, and then asking her to recall what it sounded more like? And then also having 1 or 2 individuals with full auto, or possibly 2 with semi-auto, 1 with full auto, and just to see what she would say, if she would be willing. Obviously, no one would force her to do that or anything like that, but just to clarify. Now, in the FBI report, there's a couple extra details here. The FBI report was from May 11th. And it states here, Elmer had her head down but did not look up once while she heard the shooting on the west side of the library. She caught a glance of a person against the backlight of the windows near table 18. Because of the backlighting, the person was fuzzy, but she remembers the person was wearing black or dark clothes, was very tall, and had a big head. The gunmen were yelling and laughing, and there was so much movement that Elmore thought there were more than two people. The voices she heard were of men. There's also a couple more pieces of info. After the gunfire on the west side of the library, there was a few minutes of quiet, and then the shooting started on the east side of the library. So if her sense of time is a little off in this panic state, of course, anybody would be panicked in that state, perhaps that would lead her to believe that there were three gunmen. But what's curious is that she doesn't say there were 4 or 5 or 6 or 1. So it's curious that she specifically said 3. I mean, is that basically just her awareness, her basic senses that put the pieces of the evidence together? Were there 3 sets of footprints, even if or footsteps? Was she not paying attention, but her brain just led her to believe there were 3, whether mistakenly or not? Is it possible there really were 3? And of course, there's other accounts where there were 2 of them at one point, but then a third individual at the library at a different point in time. It's just curious. And then there's a little bit of an inconsistency because she said she had her head down the entire time. Does that mean she, with her head down, she glimpsed something out of the corner of her eye with this backlit figure that was very tall, possibly Dylan Klebold, possibly another individual who's very tall? She doesn't recall how much of gunfire she heard coming from the east side of the library. After the gunfire on the east side slowed, she heard one of the gunmen stating something to the effect of needing more clips. Both gunmen were using profanity throughout the library. She then heard one of the gunmen somewhere behind her shaking the mini blinds of the windows. She heard a clacking sound like it was someone moving the blinds. So again, if there were 2 shadows or 2 people talking in front of her and then someone was clacking and walking behind her, would that lead her to believe there were 3 people? After hearing gunfire near table 9, Elmore doesn't remember hearing any more gunfire within the library. Elmore had her head down most of the time and could give no further detail to the movements and actions of the gunmen. Elmore had no concept of time during the shooting within the library and could not give an estimate of the total time the gunmen were in the library. Also, this explains how she got out of the school. The FBI report also stated Elmore could not recall her locker number. Now that's curious. So was she just that panicked that she couldn't recall her locker number? I don't know. So her account, of course, this is not a bulletproof account by any means. It's nowhere near as solid as the other accounts, but it's curious. It's hard because she had no concept of time. Of course, it's possible there were only 2 people in the library the entire time, but for whatever reason, she thought there were 3. And again, if that was due to footsteps, gunfire, someone moving blinds behind her, perhaps there was a student movement that she didn't know about, and for whatever reason, in all the turmoil, she might have thought that was the 3rd gunman, brain interpreted. Very possible. We don't know. This is definitely not a slam dunk by any means, but curious but she clearly stated, I believe there were 3 gunmen. Not 4, not 2, specifically 3. All right, let's move on to ACSO Nelson, page 8810. A list of 3 names that the 12 witnesses ID'd from a yearbook were turned over to ACSO investigators to forward. So apparently 12 witnesses in this instance, again, I don't know who they were referring to, had a list of 3 names. Now let's see what we make of this. This is on page 8810. So this is from the Arvada Police Department, and apparently this is Officer Nelson doing this interview with Mackay Hall. And what's interesting in this document, Mackay knows Dylan, and he identified Dylan as the guy who shot him. He said he knows the other guy, but he couldn't put a name to him at that moment. And so Hall also reports seeing an unknown subject on the roof area of the school. He was unable to identify for me if this person was a police officer or a suspect. So he also stated here, Nelson asked him if the name redacted, but the length of the name is not Eric Harris. It's not Eric by itself, unless it was listed as maybe Eric H. That would fit, but why would he say that? So there's a redacted name meant anything to him. He immediately responded, yeah, that it was probably redacted. He went on to say that when the shooting began in the library, so then he just said the John Savage situation. So Nelson asked Mackay Hall if this particular redacted name meant anything to him, not Eric Harris, because of course Eric Harris wouldn't be redacted. And he said, yeah. Yeah, it was probably this redacted name, not Eric Harris as the other guy, which is curious. He also stated that he didn't believe Dylan Klebold would have shot him if he had known who he was. Mackay Hall was simply with other jocks, whatever Dylan was shooting. I don't see in the document where there were these 3 other names. Maybe I just skipped over it, but that's curious from there. Also, it wasn't 8810. Nelson's report is 8884 through 8892. But let's continue. Jason Bear, sophomore, hid in green room off Science Hall. Quote, I heard more than 2 people yelling to each other, saying over here and stuff. End quote. This is from 1759. Let's examine that. Now, the Denver Police Department statement here says, did not see anything, hid in closet in science room. This is his statement. I was in the science room. I heard a bunch of kids screaming in the hall, so I went out because I thought it was a prank. I heard shots really close, so I went back into the room and told everyone to get into a storage closet or greenhouse. I kept hearing screaming and shots and bombs. We stayed there until about 3 o'clock when the SWAT team came in. While we were in the room, I heard one of them say he wanted to die. I heard more than 2 people yelling to each other saying, over here and stuff. Now, the rest of the statement is kind of curious as well here. When I first started working at the pretzel maker, I thought Melissa had some problems. She seemed slow and she was weird. She hung out with some of the trench coats that don't go to our school. And again, we'll have to tackle this in a later episode. The Trenchcoat Mafia was not limited to Columbine High School. There were multiple Trenchcoat Mafias at different schools that associated with each other, and also postgraduates or dropouts that were much older. So the entire Trenchcoat Mafia angle hasn't been properly explored. But continuing on here, she talked to Shannon about knowing that Eric and Dylan were planning something. She was supposedly driving to pick up a girl at work, Abigail, and started talking about that. Abigail got scared, went home, and told her mom. Her mom told the cops about it. So if this is all true, that means that it was reported that Eric and Dylan were planning something. The day that Melissa quit, she found out that everyone knew what she had told Abigail, and she ran out. She has supposedly been with them when they wrote in the journal about with all of their friends and saw blueprints for a building. Melissa had said that the plan was for Eric and Dylan to die because they wanted to. She said that there were supposed to be about 4 others who were in on it and do some shooting. 4 others who would go in and do some shooting and leave before the cops got there. But she said it afterwards, so it might not be true. Now, this is really, really bizarre because he's stating here that this Melissa character at the job they work, this date was May 4th, 1999, by the way. Obviously, it'd be a little bit more damning if it was the day of the shooting. So this was after the shooting. So make of that what you will. Now, what's weird is the JCSO, Jeffco County Sheriff's Office. This report by an officer is handwritten, kind of sloppy, by the way. I can't even read the officer's name here. This report was written up August 2nd, 1999. Contacted Bear by phone to conduct an interview. Bear said that he was in, what is that, biology class. This was really bad handwriting by this officer. Where he heard a lot of gunshots. He thought it may be fireworks and a senior prank. He came out of the class to see what was going on. He saw a white man in a black trench coat with a gun, and he could not tell if it was a rifle or shotgun. He came back into the classroom, and he heard the gunshots get louder due to them being closer to the classroom. He heard 2 different types of shots, and one sounded like a shotgun, the other was a rapid fire, possibly from the Tech 9. Since the shots were getting closer, the kids in the class went to greenhouse where the door was locked, and he sat on the floor and balled up for about 4 to 5 hours until the SWAT team came to help them out. He did not know what time that was. It's curious, the original report stated he didn't see anything. Now, this one he said he did see at least one person. While in the greenhouse, he said he heard bombs go off that shook the room. He heard someone in the hallway say, "I want to die today. Today I'm gonna die." Bear did not know the shooters, but did know of them. I don't know what that means. So I guess, so he kind of knew them, but he never knew them personally or talked to them. Okay. I don't know if that's what that means. Bear said he saw the something he no longer, is that encountered on the gunman or his description? He immediately turned around and returned back to the classroom. Bear said because of the trench coat hiding the suspect's physical features, he did not see any further identifying features. Bear did not get more than just a quick look at the suspect he saw. Once again, as soon as he saw the chicken scratch, he did an about face and speedy retreat. Weird. Terrible handwriting, by the way. So he did, and also this report, he neglected to mention that he heard 3 individuals, which is curious. Or more than 2 people. He didn't say 3. So it could have been 3, 4, 5. He said more than 2. So he was clear about the more than 2. And I mean, there's a couple ways to take that too, because if 2 of them were yelling at the same time, so their voices were kind of overlapping, and then he heard a third voice, that could explain that. Or they were just 3 distinct voices, so he could tell they were different people. I mean, who knows? Let's move on to Anthony Samaro, freshman. This is from page 5071. Tony stated that 2 suspects came in the front door and 1 came in the side door. And on this list on what really happened, they listed as 5071, but in the 11K reports, Anthony Samaro's testimony is between pages 4297 and 4304. So let's look at it. Supplemental report, investigator Mike Halen. There is no date on this. Oh, there is. May 11th, 1999. CHS student in cafeteria at an unknown table in the west corner by the west door for the 4th hour with Preston Jordan, Brian Adams, Pat Caruso, Lance Kirkland, and Nick Burer. At table in the same location for lunch hour with Lance Kirkland, Danny Rohrbaugh, Sean Graves, James Medow, and a new student named Robert. No last name. Saw another student in the cafeteria with Jason Ottrieth, who told him Anne-Marie Hochshelter was shot and that someone was throwing pipe bombs. Looked out west window and identified Dylan Klebold standing on top of a hill by the stairs throwing an object into the west parking lot. Saw the same suspect walking toward west cafeteria door from bottom of the stairs moments later. Saw no other suspect, saw no guns, saw no duffel bag. Usually saw a trench coat student in the cafeteria at the table alone for the 4th hour, whose description is similar to that of Chris Morris. Did not see that student morning of shooting. A neighbor named Tony Martinez, who has a son, Corey, who goes to Columbine, reported that he went to the school to check on his son that day and was shot at by the front doors. That's weird. So there was a parent that got shot at when he went to the front doors. Is that new information? I don't remember hearing about that prior. On May 10th, 1999 at 20:15 hours, I contacted Anthony Samaro at his home for an interview. Anthony's parents were present. Anthony then told me the following. He is a freshman at Columbine. When asked about Eric Harris, he said that he had seen Eric in school before, wearing a black trench coat. He said he used to see Eric leave the school for lunch hour and join other students at a black BMW in the lot. He would see this from the cafeteria windows. He did not know Eric Harris by name. When asked about Dylan Klebold, he said that he has seen Dylan in school before wearing a black trench coat. He said that Dylan would also be one of the students to go with Eric to the black BMW in the lot for lunch. He did not know who the driver of that car was. He did not know Dylan Klebold by name. When asked, he did not know redacted, or redacted. He said that he has seen 7 or 8 different students wearing the black trench coat at times. He did not know the names of those students. He has heard of the name Trenchcoat Mafia and thought they were like a gang. He did not know any of the names of the students who associated with the trench coat students. So he did say he saw somebody description similar to that of Chris Morris. So he did not know Chris Morris by name, I'm assuming. Did that one instance of Chris Morris, was that supposed to be redacted and they forgot? He usually goes to the cafeteria for 4th hour because he has that class time off. He said that he often saw one of the trench coat students in the cafeteria for that 4th hour. He said the student always sat alone at table WW, referring to the diagram, reading a book. He would see the student at least once a week. He described the student as follows. White male, wore a black beret backwards, wore sunglasses, black trench coat, no further description. He said he did not remember that student being in the cafeteria for 4th hour on the morning of the shooting. When asked, he did not see any trenchcoat student or associate at the school the day of the shooting. He identified Dylan Klebold outside the cafeteria when the shooting began. When asked, he did not see any suspicious object that was out of place at school the day of the shooting. When asked specifically, he did not see any duffel bags. On the day of the shooting, he has 4th hour off. When his 3rd hour science class got out, he walked down to the cafeteria to spend his 4th hour time with friends. Referring to the diagram, he thought he sat with his friends at one of the following tables: ZZ, SS, CC, TT, YY, or XX. He was with Preston Jordan, Brian Adams, Pat Caruso, Lance Kirkland, and Nick Burer. When the lunch hour began, he did not know if he switched tables or not. If he did switch tables, he said it would have been in the same area. Some of his friends left the table and some remained at the same table. He remembered being at the table for lunch with Danny Rohrbaugh, Lance Kirkland, Sean Graves, James Medow, and a new student named Robert, whose last name is unknown. What a thorough investigation here. He said others may have been at that table also. After several minutes into the lunch period, everyone at his table went outside via the west door except for Robert Medow, who stayed in with him. He said that once those students were outside, he heard what sounded to him like a black cat firecrackers going off somewhere outside. James Maddow then came running in from the west door and told him he heard gunshots. He then walked to the west windows of the cafeteria and looked outside at what was going on. He looked up the hill by the stairs and saw a trench coat student he identified as Dylan Klebold. He made this ID from being familiar with that student from seeing him in school at times, combined with the news media putting a name to that student. And again, that's why it's so critical to look at the dates of these reports, because the reports that are dated day of, this is before any media. The kids were just in the school. So, curious. He said that Dylan was standing about 5 yards west of the top of the stairs. He saw Dylan holding something close to his chest with both hands and then saw him throw an object out into the west parking lot. He said that he got a good look at Dylan as Dylan was facing his direction when he threw this object. He described the object as being silver or white, and then it looked like a handgun to him. He then described what Dylan looked like he saw on the hill with the day of the shooting. White male, 6'2 to 6'4". Skinny, lot of hair sticking out on the side that was wavy and curly, light brown in color, that was over the ears, unknown if wearing a hat, unknown glasses, saw sideburns, wearing black trench coat to the knees, unknown shirt, unknown pants, unknown shoes. So this immediately jumped out at me, because let me repeat that again. So he saw white male, 6'2 to 6'4", skinny, lot of hair sticking out on the side, wavy curly, light brown in color, that was over the ears, unknown if wearing a hat, unknown sunglasses, saw sideburns. So he couldn't tell if the guy was wearing a hat or not, but he saw sideburns. What does that tell us? And I think it's now time to take a pause and go down the rabbit hole that is the Trenchcoat Mafia and all of the possible other individuals that might have been cited. Now, in these sightings, there could be conflations as to who is shooting false memories. Sure, all of that could be at play, but it's really, really hard, obviously. But let's look at the biggest issue here. Because Dylan Klebold clearly does not have any sideburns or anything that can be misconstrued as sideburns, and neither does Eric Harris. Now, Dylan Klebold is 6'3". Now, here's the other mind shock that a lot of people... Nobody talks about this when it comes to the Columbine case. Apparently, the Trenchcoat Mafia and associates were all these giant, tall behemoths way over 6 feet tall. So let's look at the usual suspects when it comes to either the Trenchcoat Mafia or associates of Klebold or Harris. Brooks Brown is not a Trenchcoat Mafia member officially. I don't even know if anybody accused him unofficially of being a member, but it is curious that he stands 6 foot 5 inches tall. He is taller than just about everybody we're going to discuss. Klebold 6'3". So Brooks Brown has very prominent sideburns, as you can see in this video interview taken April 21st, 1999. Those are some serious burns. And also Joe Stair, in this video still taken just days after, sideburns not quite as long as Brooks Brown, but he does have that long wavy hair. Now, Brooks Brown himself, his hair is not crazy long, so it looks like this could have possibly been Joe Stair. Now, Joe Stair's exact height I couldn't find. People say that he's maybe 6 feet tall. So maybe it could be Joe Stair. Joe Stair has the longer hair, and the sideburns, but he doesn't have as crazy sideburns as Brooks Brown. But Brooks Brown is 6'5", but his hair not quite as long as Dylan Klebold's. What do we make of that? Couldn't tell you there. Let's look at the other Trenchcoat Mafia members. Chris Morris, the so-called leader, stands 6'4". In this image taken the day of the shooting, we can clearly see he does not have super long hair and he does not have prominent sideburns in any way. Then we have an individual, another Trenchcoat Mafia member and or ex-member. Again, what we're going to get into with the Trenchcoat Mafia is Memberships ebb and flow. This isn't the most organized group. This is a group of possible psychos, possible occult members. Possibly some of them match the description of violent occult Satanists, and others do not. They're just more laid back goths. So there's mix and match here. Obviously, we're not going to attribute all qualities to all members. Obviously, we can't say for certain with 100% who is a member, who wasn't at any particular time, especially if they were going back and forth. But Robert Perry was personally named and identified by many individuals, dozens of individuals. Robert Perry also stands 6'5" tall, and he also has long wavy hair like Dylan Klebold. But he doesn't really have sideburns. Another curiosity also, if the description here by Tony Samaro, he identified this individual 6'2" to 6'4", so within an inch or so, I mean, this matches a lot of Trenchcoat Mafia members, curiously. So, yeah, Robert Perry, 6'5". The other issue we're going to get into later is the acne. Robert Perry has prominent acne on his face, whereas Dylan Klebold does not. What does that mean? I don't know. We'll get into that later. Zach Heckler, 6'2". Apparently, he might have been a little bit heavier than the others. Nate Dykman, 6'2" tall. A good friend of Dylan Klebold, described by some as Klebold's best friend and not Harris. Now, the other curiosity here is Nate Dykman also looks very similar to Brooks Brown. He doesn't have sideburns, though. These photos were taken from interviews within days, I believe the 30th, so within 10 days or so, of the shooting. He does not have the sideburns, but he does have very similar facial features. The eyes, eyebrows, nose, mouth, and head shape, very similar. His hair seems to be cut a little bit shorter, but from a distance. Also, he's 6'2", so not quite 6'5", but these guys are all well over 6 feet tall. Now, the coincidence stack is so high here. I mean, it's just crazy. Also, some witnesses saw a clearly mustached individual. This would match Joe Stair. So, again, and long hair like Dylan Klebold. So, obviously not exactly the same. Joe Stair's hair is a little bit straighter than Klebold's. But either way, I mean, there's just so many curiosities here. Brian Sargent has also been named by quite a lot of individuals. The issue here, he's the only short member of the Trenchcoat Mafia, apparently. So he was short, stocky, overweight-ish as described, pudgy, round-faced. So this also a unique description, because this description of Brian Sargent does not match either Dylan Klebold or Eric Harris. Nobody would describe skinny, scrawny Eric Harris as overweight, pudgy, or fat-faced in any way. Now, another curiosity here, we have Eric Veek, who was in the Audio Video Club and did videos with Dylan and Eric. He is closer to Eric Harris's description. From a distance, could he be mistaken for Eric Harris? Coincidentally, he's about the same height as Eric Harris. Of course, Eric Harris's height a little bit in dispute. Now, with his head, with being shot in the head, I mean, who knows how accurate the autopsy was, which labeled him as 5'8.5". His license says 5'7". Obviously, it's possible he could have grown a little bit. But he looks quite short. I mean, possibly a lot of that is standing next to Dylan Klebold. But even 5'7" is not super short. Apparently, Brian Sargent was shorter than 5'7". In order to be described short, what would that be? I would say 5'6" and under, maybe? But perhaps maybe Brian Sargent was 5'7" officially, but because he was overweight, he looked shorter? Who knows? Either way, you can't mistake Eric Harris for Brian Sargent or Klebold. They do not look the same in any way, so people identifying Brian Sargent as a shooter, that's curious. That's curious. Eric Veek, I'm actually not sure anybody identified him as a shooter. We'll be going through all of the accounts, but many thought he knew more than he has stated, and he was actually arrested that October, I believe, either September, October of 99, for making threats to finish the job that Dylan and Eric started. And there's a lot of weirdness surrounding Eric Veek. Some believe it's simply that he was more of an outsider than even Dylan or Eric, who had plenty of friends, hung out with all these Trenchcoat Mafia members. And I think now is a good time to really get into the history of the Trenchcoat Mafia to truly understand the atmosphere at Columbine. So let's also keep in mind Columbine has about 2,000 students. So the fact that all these Trenchcoat Mafia members are all really tall guys, two of which have long hair just like Klebold, I mean, it's really curious. Really curious. And let's get into it. So the people saying it's all coincidental, out of all the students identified, how come none of the students identified any non-Trenchcoat Mafia members? Some would say they did. There was one or two other individuals, but most of them identified Chris Morris or Robert Perry. Some might have identified, and Sergeant possibly Dykeman. Now, Heckler, out of all these, seems to be the least likely to be involved, and we'll go into why, as well as Eric Veek. But these other individuals, and Brooks Brown, again, so much controversy regarding Brooks Brown in many different ways. So he's, of course, the one that had the issue with Eric Harris. The police were called, etc. Nothing was ever done. And his family, of course. On the other hand, Eric Harris's father had some choice words about Brooks Brown as well. And Eric Harris's father, of course, in the Air Force, a government employee. I mean, there's so many curiosities, oddities. It's really, really crazy. The coincidence theorists, of course, write it all off as nonsense. The other thing that's weird is a lot of these Trenchcoat Mafia guys, their alibis are either with a girlfriend, sleeping at home alone, not going to school, or their mother. And it's really, really bizarre. I mean, I don't know what to make of it. There's also other members of the Trenchcoat Mafia we have to discuss, some of the older guys. And some people say, okay, most of these guys weren't even in school at the time. They weren't enrolled, but they were cited at the school, not just by students, but by faculty. I think there were even official warnings to, I think, Joe Stair and maybe one or two of the others to not continue coming to the school because they either were expelled or dropped out, whatever the case may be. But they were cited on the school multiple times before the date of the shooting. So to hallucinate and pretend it couldn't have been them because they weren't currently enrolled, I mean, again, just one of these silly things the coincidence theorists grasp to. So let me first read, before we get into the whole Trenchcoat Mafia situation, so I'm going to read from Rita Gleason's book, Evidence Ignored, What You May Not Know About Columbine, also a controversial book. There is a chapter on the Trenchcoat Mafia. It's actually chapter 1. And I'm going to read this chapter here. When news of trouble at Columbine High School broke, it was not long before the media was relaying stories about the Trenchcoat Mafia. As the day wore on, the tales about the Trenchcoat Mafia grew increasingly more bizarre. The group was a far-reaching syndicate of disposed misfits bent on world domination and revenge for past mistreatment. They were a gang of Satan-worshipping bisexuals and homosexuals with an X-rated initiation ritual. None of this was true, of course, but it would be months before some, including the news media, came to that conclusion. Even today, there are many who are still unclear as to the workings of the Trenchcoat Mafia and what, if any, relationship the group had to the Columbine killers Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. While it would be easy to blame the media for disseminating this information, the seeds for this story came from within the walls of Columbine High School. Students were familiar in varying degrees with the kids who dressed mostly in black and kept to themselves at the table under the stairs in the cafeteria. Rumors floated about these kids, their beliefs, their activities, and what one had to do to join the group. No one was really sure exactly who belonged to the Trenchcoat Mafia. Even amongst the students who had been part of the group, there was disagreement over whether Harris and Klebold were mere associates or full-fledged members. And that's, again, something the coincidence theorists and all of these goofs that try to dismiss any connection between Eric and Dylan and the Trenchcoat Mafia, they wore trench coats. And not even all of the Trenchcoat Mafia wore trench coats, but Eric and Dylan did. And they ran in the same circle of friends. They're close friends with the head of the Trenchcoat Mafia at the time, Chris Morris, as well as many other so-called full-fledged members. They all worked together at Blackjack Pizza, which we'll get into later as well. And furthermore, certain members of the Trenchcoat Mafia actually named them as members of the Trenchcoat Mafia in their initial interviews. Why would they do that? if they really weren't part of the Trenchcoat Mafia. That's weird. Wouldn't they want to distance themselves? Which they did later. And certain members distanced themselves right away. Furthermore, all of the coincidence theorists and those who maintain Eric and Dylan had nothing to do with the Trenchcoat Mafia point to the infamous yearbook photo the previous year of the Trenchcoat Mafia in the yearbook as a group or club. And this is hilarious because some deny the existence of any Trenchcoat Mafia. I mean, there's goofs out there that think the Trenchcoat Mafia was made up. There's an actual photo here of this as an official club or semi-official. However, I mean, if it's in the yearbook, I mean, I don't know what how the organization ranks, of whether it has to be official, unofficial, what that entails. There's a photo of them in the yearbook, and of course, there's members that are not in that photo. And even with official groups like the Math Club, I mean, obviously, not every single member every single year is going to be present at the day of the photograph or want to be in it, or if their membership ebbs and flows based on either grades, other sports they play, or just time, they might leave the club and then come back. So whenever the picture happened to be taken, they weren't there for the picture. To hallucinate and pretend, one, they would have had to have been in the picture. Also, if Eric and Dylan kind of saw themselves as fringe outsiders of even the Trenchcoat Mafia, they might have not even wanted to be in the photo, or they might have not have known when the photo was even going to be taken. They might have not been in school that day. They might have not known about it. Whatever the case may be, or they just didn't want to be in it. That doesn't mean they weren't part of the group. And when we're talking about a group like this, a loosely associated gaggle of possible psychopaths, what does official and unofficial status to be part of the group even means? If they're hanging out with core members of the Trenchcoat Mafia, if they work with them, they're friends with them, they're doing these violent acts and pranks and all of these things, playing over at each other's houses all the time, they're basically part of the group. Whether you want to call them official members or not, they are at minimum unofficial members of the Trenchcoat Mafia. So let's continue here. As far as the general student population was concerned, if a kid wore black, a trench coat, or duster, or hung around with known members of the clique, then that kid was as good as a member. The only fact that was fairly universally well known was that the students in the Trenchcoat Mafia were outcasts. As the first wave of kids was streaming out of the school during the initial gunfire and explosions, the survivors relayed bits and pieces of information about who was responsible for the attack to the police and those assisting victims. The sports and athletics supervisor at nearby Clement Park helped shelter some of the fleeing students in the park's maintenance facility. He relayed to the police that, quote, a majority of the students he helped informed him there had been a Trenchcoat Mafia gang shooting over at the high school, end quote. Now, that's a curious statement because some believe that there was more than one group of shooters, and Eric and Dylan and possibly one or two other individuals were on one side, and that other individuals were at the other side. Now, if they were both shooting up the school, but the second group, might have not necessarily been working with Eric and Dylan. Not that they would shoot each other, but they just took advantage of the fact that there was all this murder and mayhem going on. So to those who don't know what's going on, it might have appeared like a gang shooting with so many individuals with guns wearing trench coats. Just a theory, just a thought, especially if that second group was only there for a few minutes or a short period of time. So Eric and Dylan were there the majority of the time. So would that explain all the sightings? I don't know. Continuing on here, the Clement Park supervisor transported a police officer via golf cart over to obtain first impressions from kids taking refuge at the park. Those observations were confirmed by a second individual, a salesman who had been taking a scheduled tour of Clement with the park's maintenance man. In his interview, he, quote, advised that the only thing he had heard the juveniles say was the Trenchcoat Mafia did it, end quote. Now that's curious. Would if there was only two guys there, would you say that an entire group did it with all these members, upwards of 12 members? I don't know. Again, these are just the initial reports. Obviously, there could have been a lot of there was a lot of confusion, but it's just curious, these initial statements and how they were swept under the rug after the fact. The salesman left the park area shortly after noon on that day, roughly 40 minutes after the attack began. It makes him among the first to receive information about what was transpiring at the school. And of course, in true crime, you really do have to listen to the initial reports in a certain way, because sometimes there is a mistake and it can get clarified. Other times, the most accurate information is coming the earliest. Then, after a narrative is established, it could be swept under the rug, and is in many cases. Again, I'm not saying that that's what happened here. I'm just saying there's a lot of variables here that point to the possibility that that happened here. Even one of the first shooting victims, interviewed in his hospital bed shortly after coming out of surgery that afternoon, told police that the gunmen were dressed in black trench coats and referred to them as the Trenchcoat Mafia. Several other witness accounts in those early hours to both law enforcement and the media also pointed the finger squarely at the Trenchcoat Mafia. The police were so inundated with leads as to the Trenchcoat Mafia's involvement that they devoted quite a few resources, including an investigator from the FBI, to look into the group. A questionnaire entitled Team 4 Interview Guideline Minimal Questions to be Asked, which was filled out by many of the witnesses, included the questions: did you see or talk to any of the Trenchcoat Mafia members on Monday? On Tuesday? How about the prior week or weekend? Can you provide any further information on the members of the Trenchcoat Mafia? While it may be convenient to claim that the media created the legend of the Trenchcoat Mafia in the days and weeks after the incident, the police were taking the group very seriously based upon information received from victims of the attack. The limited scope of the Trenchcoat Mafia was evident fairly on, as 8 days after the massacre, police reported, "We had no information that the Trenchcoat Mafia was anything other than a small group of associates at this one school." And what's curious is that there is actually plenty of evidence that there's Trenchcoat Mafia all over the country, actually, and we'll be getting into that. Some individuals will be going over this report even claimed that there were national meetings of this group, and we'll be getting into that later. It would take several more months before law enforcement officials were confident that no one else in the clique participated in the planning or orchestration of the attack. And then, of course, there's different law enforcement officials. Rita Gleason fallaciously groups them all together in this black and white logical fallacy, but there are still today members of law enforcement that have their thoughts that Dylan and Eric did not act alone in some capacity, either that others helped plan and were not part of the shooting, or that others helped plan and were part of the shooting, or simply that others knew and did nothing about it, or just simply didn't go to school that day, which is also curious. I don't have the attendance reports. It would be curious to have the attendance reports of all the other days in school. Is this a 9/11 type situation where just an astronomical amount of students simply don't show up that day? Again, I don't know. I can't compare. It's just curious that of all the 2,000 students, the amount of individuals associated with Eric and Dylan that didn't go to school that day is quite curious. Now, the counterpoint to that is that a lot of those Trenchcoat Mafia members and or affiliates, their siblings were in school that day, so that's kind of, I mean, it's hard, because if they truly knew, would they allow their sibling to go to school, or did they somehow think that their siblings wouldn't be harmed for some reason? Again, I don't know. It's hard to make heads or tails of this information. Also, if a lot of them are on drugs, they might not necessarily have thought about protecting their sibling in that moment, even though they normally would. Or maybe they wouldn't. I don't know. Again, I don't know these people. Early reports of the Trenchcoat Mafia were fueled by many misconceptions that had swirled around the group at Columbine High School. The myths surrounding the Trenchcoat Mafia were introduced to the school community early on. Many students at the school told police they had been warned away from the group before they ever reached Columbine. In an interview with a boy shot by Dylan Klebold, he stated that in the previous year, while he was still in middle school, he heard rumors that you need to stay away from those guys. His statement was echoed by another student who relayed to investigators that when she was an 8th grader at Ken Carroll Middle School, her class was visited by Columbine High School student representative who told the Ken Carroll Middle School students to avoid any of the Trenchcoat Mafia students. And another point here, even if the insider Trenchcoat Mafia members did not count as Eric and Dylan as part of their group, and of course after the shooting they would probably want to distance themselves from Eric and Dylan and say they weren't part of the Mafia, even if they were. However, if Eric and Dylan are always hanging out with, working with, and associating and talking with Trenchcoat Mafia members, including Chris Morris, the head of the Trenchcoat Mafia at the time, allegedly, then even if they technically, on paper, within the members, weren't part of the Trenchcoat Mafia, everyone else at the school would still think they were and label them as such, so we have to keep that in mind. And for all intents and purposes, what's the difference whether they were official members or not? The association was there, the interest in guns was there. I mean, all of these things were there. So, interesting. The girl reported that she heeded this advice. A third student, a freshman, reported a similar warning but admitted that she was not sure who actually was in the Trenchcoat Mafia. One boy was told by a friend that he should never have anything to do with them and that he should never look them in the eyes and just avoid them at all costs. A prevalent belief was that members of the Trenchcoat Mafia were either gay or bisexual and that those in the group all had sexual intercourse with one another. Other students thought that the Trenchcoat Mafia required new recruits to be sexually jumped in to the gang. A Columbine senior told investigators that it was her belief that anyone interested in joining the Trenchcoat Mafia had to do strange sexual things to become a member. And another girl stated that she had heard that girls wishing to join the group had to sleep with an unknown guy who wore a beanie hat with a propeller. The rumor was completely baseless. A former student and one of the group's founding members told police that the only requirement for joining the clique was to be liked by the other members. The question about the sexual identity of those in the Trenchcoat Mafia may have originated from the tendency of members to exchange friendly greetings. According to one associate of the group, they treated each other as family, often hugging each other when departing company. A former Trenchcoat Mafia member was known to say hello to both his male and female friends by kissing them on the lips. It was that behavior, in part, that resulted in some abusive name-calling by other students. Some kids felt that the hugging and kissing was done for attention and to stir controversy. When this happened, everyone would call them names. In one particular incident, a year before the attack by Harris and Klebold, some Trenchcoat Mafia members responded to the name-calling by escalating the behavior to groping and physically making out in front of the jocks. School officials felt this was done to harass the jocks. The Trenchcoat Mafia members involved were disciplined and told not to engage in that type of conduct. Despite the rumors, most of the members of the Trenchcoat Mafia were actually heterosexual. While their dating opportunities may have been limited due to their status as social outcasts, most of the members of the group were known to date individuals of the opposite sex. A former Trenchcoat Mafia member and girlfriend of someone still within the group told police she was aware of the student body's perception that Trenchcoat Mafia members were gay. She heard the guys sleep with the guys, the girls sleep with the girls, and then they trade. She confirmed that this was, in fact, untrue. And in high school, I mean, those rumors kind of are made about any group of unliked students, so that's not surprising that these rumors would spring up. Another widespread misconception was that all of the Trenchcoat Mafia members worshipped the devil. In the Christian community of Littleton, this belief engendered fear and mistrust of the group. The idea likely took hold because the Trenchcoat Mafia members were known to wear black clothing and played card games like Magic in the cafeteria. Magic is a trading card game that involves battles between wizards called planeswalkers. Some students felt that this game was associated with Satanism, with one student telling police that he thought the Magic cards were cards about the devil and about power. Many in the Trenchcoat Mafia listened to music with darker themes that would not be classified as mainstream. On occasion, some male members of the group would also wear white or black makeup and black nail polish. One student reported to police that early on in her attendance at Columbine, she was warned to avoid the Trenchcoat Mafia because they were satanic, they used drugs together, and they all have sex together. In police interviews, the Trenchcoat Mafia were described as satanic, devil worshippers, and devilish. Trenchcoat Mafia members did nothing to help allay these impressions with some of their behaviors. Following the incident when the Trenchcoat Mafia members were reprimanded for groping one another in the cafeteria, one of them approached a table and began telling each occupant of the table that Satan loves you. Another member would carry a book he referred to as the Devil's Bible, while discussing with others why he did not believe in God. Many Trenchcoat Mafia members and associates professed varying beliefs of atheism, agnosticism, Wiccanism, and even Satanism. Such associations were individual, however, and Satanism did not represent the group as a whole. as is the case with almost everything in every topic. Okay. Whether Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were members of the Trenchcoat Mafia has been a hotly debated topic for years. By their senior year, it is widely believed that the Trenchcoat Mafia was a less noticeable part of the Columbine landscape. Some felt that the members of the group had largely disbanded after some of the founding members graduated the previous year. A dedication to the Trenchcoat Mafia was supposed to appear in the 1998-99 yearbook. Indicates that there were still some students who identified themselves as Trenchcoat Mafia. The dedication, which was pulled by Columbine staff after the massacre, read, "Ode to the Trenchcoat Mafia. From hacking and bowling to a downtown day at a certain convention, from players and abstainers to certain teachers we won't mention, from learning to sack and wearing black to last year's week of OOS suspension. High school is over, so get some coolios and relieve that built-up tension. Have an awesome summer, Robin." And of course, this is Robin Anderson, friend of Dylan Klebold. Several of the original members of the Trenchcoat Mafia, when interviewed by police, indicated that both Harris and Klebold were full members of the group. Interesting. A female member echoed the sentiments that the clique had begun to fizzle out, but that Eric and Dylan became more involved around that time. One of the founding members of the group told police that Klebold and Harris joined the Trenchcoat Mafia in 1997, and Robin Anderson, who was found to have assisted Harris and Klebold in obtaining guns used in the shooting, classified the Trenchcoat Mafia as, quote, "a loose-knit group of individuals that included Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris," end quote. So this is Robin Anderson, who knew Dylan Klebold very well, and I guess knew Eric Harris well enough. I mean, it's curious, because if we simply call the Trenchcoat Mafia a group of friends, then clearly Eric and Dylan are part of this group of friends. Clearly. I mean, that's not debatable based on all these accounts, and we'll go over a bunch of them. So they were clearly good friends with Trenchcoat Mafia members. So debating the official membership, that might be a waste of time, because there's other members of the Trenchcoat Mafia that might have used to be in it, then stopped, went back, whatever. All of these labels are kind of meaningless. They were part of the circle of friends with the Trenchcoat Mafia members. Therefore, this is a group of friends. I don't know if that can be debated. Yet a few of the boys' acquaintances, including one of the original Trenchcoat Mafia students, felt that they were not. Now again, if this guy wasn't friends with Eric and Dylan, and he only hung out with other Trenchcoat Mafia members, his idea of what the Trenchcoat Mafia is, of course, would not include Eric and Dylan, because there's quite a few members of the Trenchcoat Mafia. So that's not really surprising that one or two members who did not hang out with Eric and Dylan, or even 3 or 4 members, or even 5 members, even half the members, if they simply didn't hang out with Eric and Dylan when the other members of the Trenchcoat Mafia, including the alleged head leader of the Trenchcoat Mafia, Chris Morris, that wouldn't mean much, but that seems to be what it is. So there's members of the Trenchcoat Mafia that Eric and Dylan simply were not friends with. So those members would not include them in their perception of what the Trenchcoat Mafia is, because they hang out with the other members when those members are not hanging out with Eric and Dylan. And that really explains everything, does it not? Okay, there's no way to know for certain if Eric or Dylan identified themselves as part of the Trenchcoat Mafia. According to Tom Klebold, Dylan's father, he had heard Dylan mention the Trenchcoat Mafia, and he advised that Dylan told him that the jocks called him and his friends that. Mr. Klebold said that Dylan was kind of amused by the name the jocks had given them. So Dylan Klebold is saying that the jocks called Dylan and his friends, which include Eric Harris, the Trenchcoat Mafia. I mean, how much more clear can you get? The evidence for Eric Harris's involvement is not completely clear either. Harris did not wear his duster often, but not all Trenchcoat Mafia associates had one, nor were they required to in order to be part of the clique. Harris had been good friends with Chris Morris, one of the group's founding members, for a few years, and he did submit a video assignment for his government economics class in December 1998, featuring himself and Klebold, entitled Trenchcoat Mafia Hitman for Hire. And that's been abbreviated to Hitman for Hire in the years after, in this kind of rewriting of the narrative. It's kind of curious. So the official original title is Trenchcoat Mafia Hitman for Hire. Why would Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold title a video Trenchcoat Mafia Hitman for Hire if they're not part of the Trenchcoat Mafia? In the paper, Harris wrote to accompany the video, he stated that, quote, the so-called Trenchcoat Mafia is a small group of friends who generally wear dark clothes, military fatigues, and long black dusters. Most people usually just stare and whisper when they see us. So he's saying Trenchcoat Mafia, small group of friends, us. Eric Harris is referring to the small group of friends, Trenchcoat Mafia, as us. Most people usually just stare and whisper when they see us. We don't mind because we generally don't like people anyway. So now Dylan Klebold has made it clear to his father that he's part of the Trenchcoat Mafia and is called as such. Eric Harris is making this perfectly clear that he considers himself part of the group in this paper, and then of course around half of the group's member clearly state that Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were part of the Trenchcoat Mafia. Other members state that they were not so-called full-fledged members, whatever that means. Okay, regardless of what the Trenchcoat Mafia was or was not, and who did or did not belong, it was universally understood at Columbine High School that the Trenchcoat Mafia members and their associates existed among the bottom dwellers of the school's social hierarchy. One would have been hard-pressed to find kids that shared a positive opinion of the group, with most viewing them as freaks, outcasts, and jokes. The sentiment was shared by many students regardless of whether or not they had personal experience with Trenchcoat Mafia members. In fact, most kids that were interviewed admitted that while they did not actually know anyone in the group, they were quite definitive in their opinions of the Trenchcoat Mafia. A male student told police that although he was not personally familiar with anyone in the Trenchcoat Mafia, the members were looked at as a joke. A Columbine senior stated he knew the name Trenchcoat Mafia. He said it was a nickname for a group of weird kids. And in a police statement, a female student claimed even though she did not associate with the group because she and her friends were athletes, she knows that the Trenchcoat Mafia type people are mean, strange, and act weird. It was common knowledge that Trenchcoat Mafia members were subjected to bullying, which was often meted out at the hands of the school athletes or jocks. And I'm going to interject here yet again. I mean, isn't it weird that all of these gigantic behemoths, these guys are over 6 feet tall, they travel in packs as part of this Trenchcoat Mafia, and they're still picked on by the jocks? I mean, wouldn't some guy like Eric Veek, who's a little smaller in stature, maybe Eric Harris, sure, but all these other guys, it seems weird. I mean, it's also tragic in a certain way because if these Trenchcoat Mafia members, I mean, they're all these giant people, they could have possibly taken more positive routes, either through athletics or, I mean, it's just, it's crazy. I mean, it's really weird to think what might have been, of course. But, and also the average size of a jock, I mean, obviously jocks could be big, but I mean, 6'4", 6'5", I mean, even 6'2", that's not the average height of a high schooler. Certainly not, you know, underclassmen or people who are not seniors. It's just weird. It's weird. In police interviews, some said that the bullying seemed to extend both ways, with members of each group intentionally antagonizing those of the other. Is that more realistic? Some students and faculty believe the Trenchcoat Mafia went out of their way to isolate themselves and provoke the name-calling and fights. Many other witnesses claimed that while they observed abuse by the jocks, they never saw retaliation by Trenchcoat Mafia associates. Also curious. Even the creation of the term Trenchcoat Mafia was born out of this bullying behavior. Members of the group did not select the name, but rather adopted the moniker after they were derisively referred to as such by a group of jocks. In a statement made by a student athlete who had come to the attention of police as someone Harris and Klebold did not like, the officer wrote, "He told me he never did anything directly to them to harass them, but was part of a group of guys who coined the name the Trenchcoat Mafia. I asked him to tell me about this. He said he, along with the other guys, jocks, were at their table in the cafeteria in the fall of '97. It was about 90 degrees outside and everyone in the school was wearing shorts except this group of guys wearing trench coats. When they walked through the cafeteria, his group began making comments like, "Look at the trench coats," one person said. "They look like they are in the Mafia." Then someone said they are in the Trenchcoat Mafia. He said he made at least one of these comments, but could not remember what he said at the time. Since that date, that was their identity. He told me after the term Trenchcoat Mafia was given to the group, there was less harassment than before they had a name. It seemed they now had a name and enjoyed the identity. And these are curious curiosities as well. Okay, continuing on here. Most of the ridicule was not so mild, ranging from abusive language to physical altercations. While the Trenchcoat Mafia was subject to derision by almost all members of Columbine's student body, the jocks seemed to be the group that delighted the most in giving them crap. The student making this claim was widely recognized as one of the original members of the Trenchcoat Mafia and was pictured in the Columbine yearbook photo of Trenchcoat Mafia group members that circulated following the massacre. A fellow student who worked with this boy at a local movie theater relayed the following to police. "Then, one night, he came into work and told me he had been chased in his car by so-and-so. Well, turns out so-and-so were athletes from my school who didn't seem to have anything better to do than torment this dude. I can see why the fellow I worked with hated Columbine High School." Other well-established members of the Trenchcoat Mafia had similar experiences, with one reporting that members of the Trenchcoat Mafia were daily victims of teasing and harassment. He indicated that in response to the bullying, he had been suspended several times for fighting while a student at the school. Another former student and Trenchcoat Mafia member told police that he was harassed by both Columbine staff and students, but that the kids were particularly cruel. They called him a freak or faggot and cornered him in the halls or threw things at him. A Columbine senior and football player told police that although he had not participated in the bullying, he knew that Harrison Klebold did not like him because he was an athlete. In his statement, he said he has seen members of the Trenchcoat Mafia harassed on a nearly everyday basis by the jocks, and especially by the football players at Columbine. He said these jocks would make fun of the Trenchcoat Mafia students' clothing, but the Trenchcoat Mafia students being harassed would not stand up for themselves. The football team's role in torment was confirmed by a member of the baseball and golf teams. According to his police statement, he knew that these kids got picked on all the time, and most of the time it was done by the football team. He believed it was just because they were different. Most kids at Columbine understood that the Trenchcoat Mafia members were not fans of the school's athletes and assumed that this attitude was a result of bullying. Brooks Brown, a friend to both Harris and Klebold, recalled an incident with a group of jocks when the jocks dumped a bag of ice water on a Trenchcoat Mafia member in the cafeteria. A fight ensued outside. When security intervened, the Trenchcoat Mafia kids wound up with 3-day suspensions. The jocks who had started the fight were never even sent to the office. Other kids witnessed physical altercation between the two groups, with one student telling police he had seen jocks call the Trenchcoat Mafia students dirt bags and stuff in the hallways at Columbine High School. He said during the school year prior to the shooting, when the Trenchcoat Mafia member students were in his weightlifting class in gym, he had seen fights between the jocks and the Trenchcoat students in the locker room. Another student reported an incident he and his friends had with Trenchcoat Mafia members in the school parking lot in the year prior to the massacre. He was in a pickup truck exiting the school grounds when a group of Trenchcoat Mafia students were blocking the road and would not yield. The student yelled at them saying, "Get out of the way, you faggots," and the driver of the Bronco came close to running them over. As they drove away, the boy alleged that Chris Morris, a Trenchcoat Mafia member and friend of both Eric and Dylan, was swinging a length of chain above his head. The confrontation was reported to school authorities about the boy who made the homophobic remark, was talked to but not reprimanded for the harassment. Morris was also allegedly known to get into physical confrontation and threaten kids with a knife. It was likely this reputation that helped promote the erroneous belief that he may have been involved in the planning or execution of the massacre. And how Rita Gleason knows it's erroneous is quite curious. I mean, did she monitor? Was she with Eric and Dylan 24/7 in the year before the massacre? Was she there? Did she see everything at all times and she knows that for sure? Very, very curious. In what might be viewed as an oddly ironic attempt to explain that bullying was rare at Columbine and did not contribute to the killing, a football player injured by wood splinters after being shot at by Eric Harris in the library told Time magazine, "Columbine is a clean, good place except for those rejects," he says of Klebold and Harris and their friends. "Most kids didn't want them there. They were into witchcraft, they were into voodoo dolls. Sure, we teased them, but what do you expect with kids who come to school with weird hairdos and horns on their hats? It's not just jocks, it's the whole school's disgusted with them. They're a bunch of homos grabbing each other's private parts. If you want to get rid of someone, usually you tease them. So the whole school would call them homos, and when they did something sick, we'd tell them, 'You're sick, and that's wrong.'" Several students detailed accounts of other incidents in which members of the Trenchcoat Mafia were the aggressors. A female athlete told police that she felt intimidated by the group because they would give her dirty looks. Another boy reported that it was this intimidation that caused him to break off his friendship with Eric Harris. He and Eric were acquaintances, but the student distanced himself from Harris in January 1999 because Eric Harris and the other Trenchcoat Mafia students began picking on people and harassing them. A Columbine student recounted his run-in with the Trenchcoat Mafia when he was cleaning up the school grounds as part of his community service. At the time of the incident, the boy's hair had been bleached blonde. He told police that a group of kids in trench coats were hanging around a black older model BMW, a description consistent with Dylan Klebold's car. One of the kids called out, "Hey, look, there's a little punk. Hey, punk, rock." Other students also saw Trenchcoat Mafia members calling kids names in the cafeteria, and a substitute teacher told police that she had spoken with 3 African-American students after the massacre who alleged that members of the Trenchcoat Mafia had been calling them names and growling at them when they passed in the hallways. The student said that the vice principal basically told them to turn the other cheek. You know what's curious? A lot of, if this is true, what the vice principal said, it seems like the school turned a blind eye to both the jocks and the Trenchcoat Mafia members, although clearly they favored the jocks and did not really discipline them. A member of the football team recounted an exchange that occurred when he parked his car near some Trenchcoat students while on his way to practice. One of the group said something to him like, "F you, get the hell out of that space." The student stated that the guy also said something like, "You stupid jock." I mean, call me crazy, but, I mean, isn't that kind of standard language for high school? When he returned from practice, he found that his car antenna had been broken. A student wrestler also had an argument over a parking spot with Trenchcoat Mafia members and was warned not to park in their space again. I mean, that's a little bit more extreme, but just the general name calling somebody stupid, I mean, doesn't that occur in every school all the time? I don't know. Again, we have to really have some metrics here when examining what may or may not be relevant. To many, it appeared that the Trenchcoat Mafia members stuck together and that if a member of the group got into a fight, then all of the members would become involved. Indeed, Robert Anderson told police about a big fight that had allegedly taken place behind the pizza parlor where Dylan and Eric worked. The fight was between 20 Trenchcoat Mafia members and some freshmen at Columbine. Wow. This is some Gang of New York fight. What the heck? 20 Trenchcoat Mafia members? That's a big fight. The boy's former boss confirmed this incident and told police he remembered Dylan Klebold and another boy waiting behind the pizza shop for the fight. He also alleged that 1 year before the massacre, Harris, Klebold, and Morris were going to battle another group behind the shops on West Columbine and South Pierce Streets. As Harris, Klebold, and Morris walked there from the Blackjack Pizza store donning their trench coats, the other group fled. Interesting. The police reports indicate a clear pattern of bullying of Trenchcoat Mafia members, as well as a mutual dislike between the group and certain factions of the Columbine student body. The reports also indicate quite clearly that despite the bullying, no other members or close associates of the Trenchcoat Mafia were involved in the planning or execution of the events perpetrated by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold. And that is actually not true. We'll be going over the exact reports that show that the FBI and the police were highly suspicious of this group. Rumors persist that several Trenchcoat Mafia members were absent from school because they had prior knowledge of the carnage that was to come. Police reports show definitively that that was not the case. How? By somebody's mom providing their alibi? Rita Gleason does not seem very logical here, but Okay, most of Eric and Dylan's friends attended school that day, and those that left the school grounds prior to the attack during the first lunch session were able to prove that they often did so in the weeks and months before the massacre. Again, sure. How does that prove they didn't have prior knowledge, though? Because if they normally leave at that time, if they did know about the massacre, then of course they would leave at that time. If they weren't participating, that is. I mean, this kind of silliness is, of course, why all these coincidence theorists fail to even understand the conspiracy being alleged and which variables would or would not come into play. That's why understanding logical fallacies is important, and on Mindshock, obviously, that's what we do. Exhaustive interviews with all suspects, analysis of surveillance videos, eyewitness accounts, and crime scene evidence indicate that Harris and Klebold, whether they were truly Trenchcoat Mafia members or not, were solely responsible for the carnage that day, and that is, of course, patently false with all of the bombs, the gun evidence not matching up, all of the over 100 eyewitness statements clearly conflicting that narrative. So Rita Gleason is really putting the propaganda spin on here. But that was the intro to the Trenchcoat Mafia. Interesting intro. And we are going to continue here with a few more accounts of the Trenchcoat Mafia. This is The Mirror, London, England, April 22nd, 1999. No author listed, and this is, I found this on the freelibrary.com, so it's just a transcript. The Trenchcoat Mafia Massacre. They hated everybody. The Outcast exclusive. Inside the minds of the Trenchcoat Mafia by the girl who ran with the gang. And of course, there's some sensationalism here, but it's curious that they interviewed a student, and these are her thoughts on the Trenchcoat Mafia. The Trenchcoat Mafia were always a weird group, but their increasingly sinister behavior should have alerted someone to their evil plans for revenge. They wore bands that read, "I hate people." Their most vicious hatred, however, was reserved for blacks and Hispanics. Adolf Hitler was their hero. His birthday, April 20th, was chosen by Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold as the date for the massacre. And there's some conflict on there. The original date may have been the 19th. And there's a whole lot of other list of coincidences on the date, but we'll get to that later. Devil worship, kinky sex games, and wild drinking binges all form part of the life within the group of social outcasts. Gang members also painted their nails with lurid varnish and wrote poems and stories about death. Smoking pot, quoting songs by shock rocker Marilyn Manson, vampire games, and the internet also held the group of teenage boys and girls together. These were intelligent middle-class kids who came from respectable homes. But they had one overwhelmingly belief in common. They were all obsessed with the idea that society had rejected them. For the past 3 years, they held secret meetings to discuss their views. They felt safe among their own, where they would often laugh and joke about killing. Expletive. No matter how hot the weather, they always wore the black trench coats. Swathed head to toe in black, they proudly showed off swastika badges and anarchy symbols and frequently chatted together in German. They would visit each other's home to listen to German music, but most of all, they loved guns. Student Pauline Corby quit the group 18 months ago after their behavior escalated out of control. She said, "I knew they were capable of violence, I just didn't know they would do it. They were very angry. After I left the group, the members started to worship the devil. They were angry about people not accepting them and no one knowing how smart they were." Pauline, a junior at Columbine High School where Harris and Klebold went on their killing spree, said the clan drank so heavily their leader, Chris Morris, was nicknamed Vodka. And this is curious because supposedly that's Dylan Klebold's nickname, or at least his online nickname. So, again, that's curious. But it was their bizarre sexual games that led Pauline to leave the group in disgust. She said male and female members would take naked showers together and they would play table football, with the loser having to strip off. Speaking from her home close to the school, Pauline said, "They became really wild. That's why I left. First of all, they began drinking heavily, nearly every night. But it was their weird sexual tendencies and devil worshipping that made me leave. Up to 6 members would get naked and take showers together. It was all very sleazy. And they would also get together to play foosball, and the loser would have to strip naked. I didn't want to be any part of that. The papers have been saying that the group were targeting gays, but some of them, both boys and girls, were bisexual and having sex with each other. But Pauline says that neither Harris nor Dylan Klebold were gay. But I didn't know them that well. They joined the group after I left, she said. I would talk to them occasionally, but we were not great friends. I didn't want anything more to do with the group. Amazingly, the Trenchcoat Mafia were tolerated by the school hierarchy. They allowed the group to put a picture into the 1998 yearbook. The caption underneath gave a sinister hint of what was to follow. It said, quote, "Who says we're different? Insanity's healthy," end quote. The school also let them make a video during class about their love of guns and how they worked. That decision tickled the Trenchcoat Mafia, who could not believe that teachers would let them make a film about weapons. Harris and Klebold were obsessed with guns. They stockpiled semi-automatics, handguns, and grenades in preparation for their plan. Harris spent weekends in his dad's garage secretly making a lethal stash of pipe bombs. Their other obsession was computers. Harris chillingly posted a message on American Online website at 8:41 a.m. on Tuesday morning saying, quote, "Today is my last day on Earth," end quote. He also posted, quote, "Preparing for the big April 20, exclamation point, exclamation point. You'll all be sorry that day, exclamation point," end quote. Now that's curious. So he posted this 8:41 a.m. or were they these separate posts? It's not clear. It's stating here that there's an 8:41 a.m. post on Tuesday morning. Today's my last day on Earth. Now anybody who visited his site would know that. Anybody who saw these clues would know that. What does that mean? Does that mean other Trenchcoat Mafia members, even if they weren't involved or didn't know, they were actually going to do anything, when they saw Eric Harris's post that morning at 8:41 a.m., what would they think? Did they think, oh, Eric's actually going to do it today? Who knows? Another Trenchcoat Mafia from Littleton said he was married to Trenchcoat Mafia and that all jock athletes will die. Harris often portrayed his violent character on the website. In his profile, his message to the world was, "Quit whining. It's just a flesh wound. Kill 'em all." He also loved playing the controversial computer game Doom, where opponents try and kill each other with pipe bombs and shotguns. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure that's what Doom is. Doom is the game on Mars with the portal to hell and you're killing demons. Harris and Klebold's plan for murder had been laid down for months, but they were cool enough to turn up at school just 3 days before the massacre for the end-of-term dance. Thaddeus Bowles, 16, who started the Trenchcoat Mafia with Harris and Klebold, saw them at the Saturday night prom. So there's a lot of inconsistencies there. First of all, Eric Harris, by all accounts, did not go to the prom. Now, exactly who saw them where after the prom, I don't know. But apparently Tad Bowles is saying that he saw them at the prom, so he was at the prom. I didn't know that either. Apparently, yeah, that is quite curious. We'll be getting into Tad Bowles as well. And it states here, he started up the Trenchcoat Mafia with Harris and Klebold. That is patently untrue. Harris and Klebold were not the original founders. We'll be getting into that later. I'm also not sure Tad Bowles was 16 at that time. I think he was older than all of them. But anyway, this is what he said. They both seemed pretty good spirits, unless they confused Tad Bowles with someone else. They both seemed in pretty good spirits, going with the flow, he said. They didn't seem depressed in any way. They were extremely bright, but not good students. I know the two of them flunked out of school just this year, and not for lack of brains. They disliked any kind of authority. They just did not like to be told what to do. And that's not true. They did not flunk out of school. And Eric Harris, by all accounts, did have pretty good grades. Other students paint a different picture. Derek Alton, 18, said he'd often heard group members talk about committing acts of violence. They just had a hatred of everyone, he said. I heard Eric Harris talk about bombs. There was a lot of bomb threats last year. Elisa Owen, 16, said they were all weird people with a sick sense of humor. They were always joking around saying, "We are going to shoot you." If this is true, I mean, that's just all creepy, though, especially after the shooting, after all of those so-called jokes in the year or more beforehand. Greg Barnes, 17, admitted he never took the group seriously and that they were ridiculed by the mainstream within the school. It was a mistake not to take them more seriously, he said. They would sit in the back of the classroom and they just didn't get involved. People made fun of them, and when I heard one of them say they wanted revenge, I said, "Oh, that makes sense." I stayed away from them. Joshua Lapp, 15, said they got ridiculed a little bit. Everywhere, anywhere, any day, no matter how hot it was, they wore a black trench coat. He added that the social tensions between the school athletes or jocks and the Trenchcoat Mafia may have been a key factor behind the attack. There was definitely animosity between the two groups, he said. Andrew Beard, 16, said Harris and Klebold often said they hated the jocks because they thought they could do anything they wanted, walk through life smoothly. Some students claimed graffiti on the toilet walls should have warned of what was to come. American football player Doug Moore said, You'd go in there and it would have Columbine will explode someday, or all jocks must die, kill all athletes. There would also be pictures of guns and swastikas. No one took any notice at the time. Trenchcoat Mafia leader Chris Morris was taken in for questioning by police hours after the tragedy took place. He was later released without any charge. All right, let's continue. Here's an article from the Washington Post, Friday, May 14th, 1999, by Lorraine Adams and Cheryl W. Thompson. Littleton focus is on gunmen's friends. So this is about a month later. Investigators probing the rampage at Columbine High School are focusing on the gunman's circle of friends, searching two of their homes, unraveling a website's cryptic writings, and questioning witnesses about possible accomplices. No additional suspects have been charged, police say, but the investigation, now in its third week, is involving dozens of local and federal agents, is proceeding under a theory that the two teenagers did not act alone in placing more than 50 bombs in and around the school, and other bomb estimates place the bombs at over 100, some closer to 200 bombs. Jefferson County Sheriff's Deputy Troy Gardelin said authorities believe that some friends of Eric Harris, 18, and Dylan Klebold, 17, knew before April 20th that the two were planning the rampage. Authorities now believe the elaborate plan was underway for a year. They have found a hit list of targets and web pages detailing earlier missions of vandalism against enemies. So far, police have questioned at least 10 former and current members of the Trenchcoat Mafia, a loosely organized group of 30 to 40 self-proclaimed high school outsiders who often dress in black clothing and military garb. Authorities have questioned a friend of the gunman, Chris Morris, 17, a Columbine senior and one of 3 students taken into custody at the crime scene on April 20th and later released. Morris's attorney, John M. Richilano, said Morris is a material witness and not a suspect and is cooperating with investigators. Morris worked with Harris and Klebold at Blackjack Pizza and was frequently seen with them on Fridays at a nearby bank where Morris has an account, and the 3 often cashed their paychecks. One question for investigators is how Harris and Klebold got the money they used to buy weapons and explosives used in the crime. On a website last year, Harris described acts of vandalism and wrote of using paychecks to buy fuses and ammunition. At one point, he added, "Plus, we got our paychecks. They aren't big, but they can cover quite a bit." Police have questions about Morris's bank account and a withdrawal he made 4 days before the shooting, according to a source familiar with the investigation. Within the last week and within 2 months previous to that, he had between $500 and $900 in Chris's account, and he had depleted it down to $7 that day, the source said. Asked about the withdrawal, Richilano, Morris's attorney, said, "I am not going to comment on specific evidence." Harris's webpage from a year ago, now considered an ominous warning of his growing rage, described the creation of 4 pipe bombs by Reb and Vodka, nicknames for Harris and Klebold. It thanked 3 unidentified people, nicknamed Jester, Imaginos, and Excalibur, for helping me make this page happen. Authorities are trying to determine whether friends knew of the preparations to use the bombs. The pipe bombs and fragments are being analyzed at a Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms laboratory in Walnut Creek, California, an ATF agent said yesterday. The analysis of fingerprints, gunpowder, and other flammable material used in the crime will take several weeks. The Trenchcoat Mafia was at its height in 97 and 98, students say, but Harris and Klebold became involved only recently. Joseph M. Stair, a Columbine graduate and early group member, said they started hanging out in their senior year. John Beachman, a 1997 Columbine graduate and former member, said he was questioned by police and turned over a list of members' names. Most of the group's original members graduated last year. Morris is one of the few original members still at Columbine. A 15-year-old friend of Morris told the Post that Morris was at the home of a Trenchcoat member, Corey Friesen, 20, and not at school at the time of the shooting because he had no classes after 10:30 a.m. Columbine school officials did not return calls. And I don't know how likely that is. How many students have only go to school until 10:30 a.m.? I don't know, maybe. As news of the shooting broke at 11:30 a.m., Morris's mother called her son to make sure he was okay, according to the friend. Morris, in turn, called 911 and reported that Klebold and Harris might be involved, sources say. And of course, Morris's alibi is other Trenchcoat member Corey Friesen, all coincidental. While the siege was unfolding inside the high school, police transported Morris from Friesen's home to Columbine. There, Morris was handcuffed in front of media cameras and placed in a police car, but not formally charged. Richelano said he did not know why his client was handcuffed. On his website, Harris describes targets, missions, and use of paychecks to pay for fuses and firecrackers. In one portion, it said that a group of Harris's friends, including Klebold, used firecrackers at one target's house and shot Klebold's sawed-off BB gun. Investigators also are looking into students who were apparent targets of Harris and Klebold. One parent who asked not to be identified said the FBI questioned her because her son's car outside the school had been rigged with a bomb. He had been taunted by members of the Trenchcoat Mafia. Another avenue of pursuit is a hit list compiled by Harris. According to 2 students interviewed by the FBI, the list contained the names of many athletes, as well as one slain student, Isaiah Scholes. Sam Riddle, the family's spokesman, said the Scholes home had been vandalized over the last year and clearly had been targeted. The family reported the incidents to police, who told them it's just kids pulling pranks, Riddle said. Judy and Randall Brown, the parents of Columbine student Brooks Brown, last year turned over to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department Harris's webpage writings, in which he dubbed his group more of a gang. We plan out and execute missions. Anyone pisses us off, we do a little deed to their house. Eggs, teepee, superglue, busy boxes, large amount of fireworks, you name it, Harris wrote. We have many enemies in our school, therefore we make many missions. Among the many students in the library who have been questioned by investigators is John Savage, a senior. Most of the victims were killed or wounded in the library. In an interview, Savage said he trembled under a library table when Harris asked him who's hiding under there. In trying to explore with investigators why he was spared, he said that this semester he had philosophy class with Harris and calculus with Klebold. I had been nice to them, Savage said, who is shy and stutters. Said in an interview, I didn't do anything super nice, just, hi, how are you doing, man? Supposedly, John Savage was a Trenchcoat Mafia member, however, so who knows how true that is. Harris and Klebold were armed with 2 shotguns, a rifle, a Tech DC-9 handgun, and nearly 60 pipe bombs and explosives when they launched the attack. Since the shootings, police have questioned Robin Anderson, 18, who bought 3 of the weapons in a legal transaction. Mark Maines, 22, turned himself into authorities last week for the illegal Tech DC-9 sale. So Robin Anderson was involved in the legal transaction, Mark Maines in the illegal transaction. My client had no knowledge of what was going to happen, said his attorney, Robert Ransom. That's an interesting name. All right, so now that we have clearly established that the Trenchcoat Mafia was real, was an actual group, and for all intents and purposes included Dylan and Eric as members, both stated by certain members of the Trenchcoat Mafia and by Dylan to his father and Eric Harris in his explanation for his Trenchcoat Mafia Hitman for Hire video. So this is all relatively clear. All right, so let's move on to an account by Devin Adams. And Devin is basically part of a group of individuals, if not close friends, then acquaintances with all of the individuals here. And on the Crime Files Tumblr, summarizes her statements to police. So she was not a member of the Trenchcoat Mafia, but she was affiliated with all of them. Named 14 members. Michelle Boudreau, Chuck Phillips, Kelly Schwab, Brian Sargent, Chris Morris, Joe Stair, Nate Dykman, Kristen Thibault, Eric Dutro, Tad Bowles, Marla Frost, Zach Heckler, Robert Perry, Patrick McDuffie, and Robin Anderson. Stated Joe Stair was not the leader of the Trenchcoat Mafia. It was actually Chuck Phillips. Chris Morris was the first to wear a duster to school, but Phillips formed the Trenchcoat Mafia group. Stated she knew about Eric and Dylan making bombs. Eric named his first bomb Anasazi and his second one Pazzi. Eric and Dylan did rebel missions at night where they blew things up or launched tons of fireworks. She didn't see any real guns, but knew Eric and Dylan went to Zach Heckler's house and shot BB guns at targets in the backyard. She was close with Dylan Klebold throughout high school, but had been distant with Eric since freshman year. She sat with Eric, Dylan, and Zach in the cafeteria in the morning and at lunchtime. Said Eric liked to dress like a commando most of the time. Dylan dressed normal in t-shirts and jeans, and Morris dressed commando all the time. Said Dutro's dress varied. He was really weird, talking about wanting to be like Hitler, and he wanted to commit genocide on a large scale. And we will get to Eric Dutro. There's a lot of Erics here. Though it was strange that Eric and Dylan could quote all the lines. So Devin Adams thought it was strange that both Dylan and Eric could quote all the lines from Natural Born Killers. Regarding the names on Eric's hit list, Stumpy was a kid Eric thought was an idiot. Scoop got all of us suspended and was Devin's ex-boyfriend, who all the others wanted to beat up. Pretty Boy was from debate class and Eric and Dylan thought he was gay. Excalibur was part of the stage crew from theater class who Eric and Dylan had made fun of. Devin Adams laughed when asked if Eric Vike was part of the Trenchcoat Mafia. She said he probably wanted to be, but Vike was just the video guy in school. Eric and Dylan liked him, but also kind of used him. Interesting statement coming from Devin Adams. She gave 3 names, redacted, that she thought might be involved in the incident. So that's really curious. Huh. Now, I'm assuming if Eric and Dylan were part of the 3, they wouldn't be redacted? I mean, what are the options here? There's 3 additional people in addition to Eric and Dylan, or there's 3 people, Eric and Dylan are part of the 3, and the 3rd was redacted. One person had threatened her on the computer over an incident at school. He got mad easily and liked to kick in cars. The second person liked to beat up his girlfriends and others for no reason, and he scared her. The 3rd person had been on the debate team with her the year before. At one meeting, he was mad at someone and looking for a pipe to beat them. She described him as a violent person who quit school 1 semester before he would graduate. And these seem to be descriptions of possibly Chris Morris, Robert Perry, Brian Sargent. In her follow-up interview, she admitted she knew about Eric and Dylan making bombs. She never saw Eric or Dylan with any pipe bombs. She said she heard a bomb go off on April 20th as she was leaving school and knew right away Eric was involved. She said that Dylan was a follower, Eric was the leader, and this is something we'll be exploring later as well. Dylan went to her birthday party the previous year and had been to her house several times. So again, people claiming that Dylan Klebold was just some outcast with 0 friends, 0 girls that were friends, 0 girlfriends, 0 anybody. Clearly that's not the case here. So, and Devin currently works for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. She graduated the class salutatorian. 2001. Huh. So she got the second highest grades in all of Columbine High School? I mean, what does that make people think? I mean, so this is someone that was associated with the Trenchcoat Mafia, with all these members. I mean, that really does make you think what these individuals would be capable of if they really applied themselves with all of their physical and mental gifts instead of some of these paths that they went down, regardless whether they were involved in the shooting or not for some of these other individuals. So someone who doesn't seem to be talked a lot about is Zach Heckler, of course. He did work at Blackjack Pizza. He dated Devin Adams. During freshman and sophomore year, Dylan Klebold was at the Hecklers all the time, according to several different people, and Heckler himself, swimming in their pool, sleeping over. A source close to the family noted Dylan's behavior started to change a few months before senior year. It was a gradual thing. Dylan was more withdrawn, less willing to be open with Zach. He was a good kid, a quiet kid who would let someone else take the lead, says the source. At some point in junior year, he picked up one of those black duster coats. This year, we hardly saw Dylan at all. The only thing they maintained was their late night phone call. It was a ritual. 10:30 at night. Hour and a half. They just talked. Sometimes these conversations got emotional. Dylan would be on the phone with Zach or on the internet, says Sarah Slater. And Zach would tell me they were crying about stuff. Now that's an interesting statement there. Because if that's true, because some people believe that Heckler's father kind of told him to disassociate from Klebold. And because Klebold was trouble or whatever. And it's curious, did they maintain this phone call? Is the source saying this was a weekly phone call or a daily or almost daily phone call? Because if it was a daily or even a weekly, I mean, talking to him once a week, every week, even though he can't come over to the house because the father doesn't like him or whatever the case may be. Again, I'm not claiming any of that is true or untrue, but it's quite curious. Now, another thing that really needs to have the proper focus is, of course, Blackjack Pizza. So Eric and Dylan worked there. Chris Morris, Nate Dykman, and Zach Heckler all worked at Blackjack Pizza before. So supposedly Eric started working at Blackjack Pizza first since he was friends with Chris Morris, who was a manager there. Now that's kind of curious that Chris Morris, this kid, is a manager at Blackjack Pizza. What does that say? And apparently he got Dylan Klebold hired there later as well. Eric Alt, Dykman, Heckler, Phillips, and Sargent were all described as having been employed at Blackjack Pizza at some point. Chris Morris also said that Perry worked under him at Blackjack Pizza, page 10,039. And so that's curious. So basically almost all of these individuals worked at Blackjack Pizza. Chris Morris is a manager at Blackjack Pizza. We would have to do a whole dedicated episode just on Blackjack Pizza, but it seems this is more than a coincidence. So not only do they associate at school and are described as friends, they go to each other's houses, they also work at Blackjack Pizza. Very curious. Very, very curious. I mean, I don't know what everybody makes of this. The coincidence theorists, of course, they have more coincidences here than to shake a stick at. I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy the level of coincidence we are dealing with here. So let's go over the search warrants in this case. So they are curious as well. So hope you guys found another edition of Mindshock True Crime interesting. If you want to support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit that bell for notifications. Or you can just go to youtube.com/Mindshock. Like and share this podcast. Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Patreon for the most in-depth logical analysis of cases, events, the paranormal, and anything and everything in between. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.